anything from a particular spectrum, there's what I hear is an attitude, an opinion, a base starting point, right? And in this case, we're talking about, okay, the blurring stuff. I don't know if I can believe this, right? It's all about the truth. It's all about So, likewise, freedom of speech. It's all these ideals: truth, liberty, the American way, apple pie,
blah, blah, blah. Weekends off. Yeah.
Okay. So everything on the left is suspect. Everything in the mainstream media is suspect. Yada yada yada. Right.
That's not.
But
what I'm saying.
I don't feel that those standards.
I'm saying that state broadcasters should always be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah, but I mean,
always.
I don't feel
whether
like,
it's
I don't feel
whether
like going
it's
through the text string.
Whether it's a more left or right wing orientation, like is it hard left like CBC and ABC, or is it moderate left like BBC or say DW?
No,
either way, and the other principle is if all you have is a sole source, if there's only one organization reporting on this, and it's a state broadcaster, red flags go up.
For you.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm not saying for anybody else. I'm just saying for me, if someone was trying to sell me on this, like if I was, if I was in charge, say, of an investigative agency, and they said, hey man, maybe there's some Canadians involved, like maybe we should be considering an investigation, I would say, okay, what evidence do you have? And if this was presented to me, I'd say, okay, if all you have is a single source of a state broadcaster, not enough. That doesn't pass the threshold of believability or credibility.
It depends. Well, in this case, I think it's do they have enough sources presented within the documentary by this single state.
I would still want to see verification outside of that, because again, what is said is only as important as what is not said. And the other thing is I'm sorry, but BBC has engaged in misleading and misrepresentation in the past. So, look at their coverage of global warming. I'm sorry, I just don't consider them to be an impeccable source. I consider them to be an agendaed source. They have something that they're driving at. So I'd want to say, okay, have you got, say, like, what's the name of the French public broadcaster? France 24?
No. I want to say TVA, but I'm not sure.
Maybe, but or say like give me like say
RFI, Radio France.
Yeah. Say if they report on it, or say SVT. Sweden has a very large Arabic demographic, so they might have some information on this. Let's say you get something like that, and say MSNBC all throws out something. Now, okay, all of those guys are either left in their editorial line or they're public broadcasters, state broadcasters. But at this point, I've now got 4 sources. And if they all independently kind of came to the same thing, regardless of their orientation or editorial line, maybe that's something, maybe we should look at it.
Right. But I mean...
But just BBC all by itself? Nope, not enough.
Well, so here's my response to that. Sometimes a story is exclusive.
Okay.
Look at Watergate and
yeah.
Washington Post, right? So there's that, right? So that's where the due diligence of the journalism comes.
And at the time, Washington Post was impeccable.
Right.
That also helps.
Right.
Well, it was an entirely different media landscape, right?
Totally. At the time,
right?
Washington Post was impeccable.
Yeah.
Washington Post and the New York Times.
And the Times were, the Times was as well, right? Like
at the time.
Yeah.
Tell me you hit record on this.
Well, yeah.
But the other thing is, and this is what I'm talking about when it talks about good faith due diligence. I feel that like if we were to go back to our text, I remember that there was a statement made and sort of kind of agreed upon by the 2 gentlemen across the table from me. That hypocrisy is the domain of the left, and the right. The left doesn't have a problem with hypocrisy, and the right, the right does, and I like that's those are.
I think we were talking about like Trudeau.
Yeah.
Or how
how
leaders of the left are exempted from the rules that they impose upon the general public.
that kind of hypocrisy. They're basically that they're exempt from the repercussions of that kind of stuff.
Clinton can engage in sexual misconduct, and that's fine.
And Trudeau can do blackface.
And he can engage in sexual misconduct and blackface, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, those are two separate things.
Well, we just meant they're both examples of hypocrisy in that the leaders of the left are exempted from the rules that the left would impose upon its own opponents.
Well, I mean, we're going down some rabbit holes here, right? And so this is why I feel like I feel the whitewashing is occurring from the other side here, right? Bringing up Clinton, right? And to me, okay, that's unfortunate. You know, it's mildly questionable. It's like, okay,
Sure.
But did it show any lack of ability to rule as president of the U.S., right? To function as president of the U.S. And I would argue, no, we don't have to argue.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you.
Right?
But that's neither here nor there. Does Trump's misconduct, sexual misconducts, interfere with his ability to
No, other things did. Right? So I'm gonna go back. Right? Watergate should have set a standard by which things are measured against. Right? Clinton measured against Watergate. No. Right?
How so? What do you mean? What was the standard then? What was the line drawn?
Well, I'm just saying. You know, there's a complete lack of ethical integrity to the Nixon administration as it came out of Watergate. Right? Not so. Clinton, it was just Clinton.
Watergate was where they broke into.
Yeah. Well, there was a couple crimes at Watergate. The first crime was the break-in,
which was in the Watergate Hotel.
Yes.
Where the Democratic
National Committee's headquarters
was meeting, and they broke in.
It was where their headquarters.
Yeah, because they wanted to copy some files.
No, they wanted to bug it.
Oh, they bugged it. Okay.
I think. Well,
they were putting in wiretap.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it exposed a whole campaign of dirty tricks against the Democrats that were funded by CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, which is a slush fund being used to fund all these covert
like a super PAC, basically.
Right? So again, I'm trying to keep it fairly central to my main theme right now, without going. And there are tons of rabbit holes we do it.
Okay.
Right. And I'm actually shocked looking back. And it's a sign of the times that Watergate actually forced Nixon out. Because the rest of the Republican Party said, okay, I think it was kind of partly, okay, this is unacceptable to us, even as Republicans, right? We're not going to take a partisan line here, you got to go. And partly because they saw public opinion, so public opinion mattered back then, right? And there was enough against Nixon back in the day. So, you might as well blow up. Compared to what came up afterwards, right? Let's talk Iran-Contra. And there was even a sexual, what was it, Clarence Thomas? I mean, that was a sexual scandal on the right
They tried.
Right. And so I feel that the right, when it comes to hypocrisy, is just rife with it, right?
Well, the question comes to that. So Iran-Contra, Reagan broke the law and got away with it. By scapegoating Oliver North and other people. Clarence Thomas, that depends on whether you believe you need a hill or not.
Yeah.
And
in my view, that was a fraud.
Right. Yeah. So the only reason
and to my mind, the Brett Kavanaugh nomination it kind of proves it because it was like the exact same playbook.
That was horrible.
Right.
What a disgrace that whole thing was.
Yeah. So because it's literally they pulled the exact same playbook that they did on Clarence Thomas. They tried to pillory him with
fabricated allegations made from whole cloth.
Yeah.
So I'm going to agree with you on the one hand that, again, like Clinton, I don't care about these things, right? They are irrelevant, right? Clarence Thomas and Kavanaugh,
right?
In that regard,
right?
That's not taking them on their merits for the positions, right? And that's why I bring it up. Okay, from the left, they shouldn't be doing that, right? I'll agree with you there. To call it fabricated, I'm not prepared to agree with that.
Fair enough.
In either of those cases,
I am,
right?
But fine, that's not the issue we're talking about.
I feel. Fast forwarding again to, and not Trump with the PP tapes, right? And his sexual proclivities whether, alleged, sorry,
You're right. Yeah.
right? Whatever. Doesn't impact his functional rule. I think that's been shown in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
The document scandal, the Ukraine call, all these things. There's a whole bunch of things there are enough things out there to kind of say, that's impeachable, right? And the right didn't do that. And I think one of the other big things about the right and the quote unquote comfort with hypocrisy is you look at what happened to the Supreme Court. When they were arguing that, when whoever it was died under Obama's watch, we should wait till after the election
Scalia?
I think it might have been
I think it's Scalia.
So whatever.
it was, yeah.
And then they're like, no, we should wait till after the election, yada, 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 right? And when it happened the other way around, all of a sudden the Republicans are, no, what do you mean? No, we've got the advantage. We're going to push through on it, right? So...
Well, the simple answer to that was just, it was Mitch McConnell had the Senate majority both times, in both instances, and he played the cards he was dealt, right? So he didn't have to approve whoever he's the Attorney General now. Was the guy that Obama was the guy?
Merrick Garland?
Garland, yeah. Garland is the guy that Obama nominated, and he refused to take it up. And then when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, he had a limited amount of time. In fact, it might have been less time than what Obama had left in his presidency, and he fast-tracked Amy Coney Barrett.
Right.
And ultimately, it was his prerogative to do so.
No, agreed.
You could say it's
but what was
and the arguments are probably a little hypocritical, but it's a political exercise.
Yep. And I do recall at the time a lot of frustration in sources, say like National Review, and another one that escapes you, but like more mainstream American right, not like far out, like Daily Signal or anything like that. What would you call more mainstream conservative? Expressing a frustration that the Republicans were, up to that point, were playing by the Queensberry rules, and the Democrats were not. In that everything that you've talked about, there are direct parallels on the Democratic side in earlier, and say the Clinton and Obama administrations. And that there was a frustration amongst the Republicans saying that here we are playing by the rules, they don't. So we need to basically, if I can if I'll phrase it in my own words, we need to get down on their level, or we're going to be extirpated from the political scene.
Well, I think that's
so I think there was an acknowledgement of that on the right, but they felt that it was a necessary evil to preserve their political viability.
Again, and I'm bringing it up in the context of the three of us talking in the discussions. And I love and respect you guys. I love doing this with you guys, right?
Because we're thoroughly disreputable people.
Yes.
And you need better friends.
I believe it's pronounced disreputable.
Which only reinforces my point. Not only are they disreputable, but they're illiterates.
I do not. We've had the good faith discussion a lot, right? And I do not fundamentally challenge the good faith at this table, right? But I do challenge to a certain extent. I do not. I'm going to push back against broad statements because I try to avoid them.
Okay.
From my point of view, and I'm going to push back against them from your point of view as well, right? That to say that the left is this, the right is that, especially if it's one particular issue that's being brought up, right?
Okay.
To say, as an example, because there's way too much of that going on. It's to use, the Israel-Palestine, Middle East conflicts as an example, right? You can go back as far as you want, and you're never going to find who started it. It's a vicious circle that's been going on for...
It's moot at this point. Yeah.
Going on for millennia, right? So, I mean...
Well, okay, in the Canadian context then, let me give you an example of what I see as right-wing hypocrisy.
Right-wing or left-wing?
Right-wing.
Okay.
Right-wing hypocrisy. A very recent one in the Canadian context. And then I'll get you to throw out a couple others if they come to mind. all of this lauding and feting of Brian Mulroney as this statesman and this honorable fellow, he wasn't. He was a crook. He was an absolute crook who was devoid of any devotion to conservative ideals and principles, who was self-seeking, sought nothing more than to line his own pockets and to feed his own ego. He was a reprehensible man. Straight up, end of story. I challenge anyone to bring me any evidence that says otherwise. And I think it's absolute hypocrisy of the Conservatives to try and laud him as this kind of noble figure and someone that they can be proud of him and his legacy. He should be a stain on the memory of the Conservative movement.
Well, I think, we dug into this a bit last episode, I think. And I agree with you. And I think, man, there's a whole lot to unpack here, right? First of all, as we discussed last time, I think there's a certain amount of nostalgia, right? Like the analogy I keep using. I didn't like Led Zepp back in the day. I like him now, right? There's he was my politician. With that comes the change in the political dynamic that has occurred since he left in, 93? It's been 30 years, right? There are things he did that actually can be looked at from a statesman-like level, right? So I think free trade is probably, because from the left at the time, we were like, no, you can't do that, right? And he pushed it through anyways. And if I'm not mistaken, he did GST as well.
Yes, he did.
I think he did, yes.
Right? Yeah. And it's funny how, looking back
That's
at
another example of hypocrisy.
So
on the right.
I think that could...
Huge example of hypocrisy on the right.
Yeah, so he could have had that either way, coming from both sides.
Can tighten this up?
Yeah, let me...
How do I do that? Sorry, I'm talking about my mic here. Anyway, keep going, Trent. Well,
and there's also this fascination, which is, again, more common today than it was back in the day, that you don't speak ill of the dead, right? So
I guess.
There's a whole bunch of stuff coming together to kind of allow for that, or to make that, those are the reasons it occurred that way. And it is partly just a lot of us are looking back at, I've lamented.
That's all we're going to get, I guess. Yeah, it's good now. Good, yeah.
I've lamented that back in the day, at least, you talk about Queensberry rules, right? There was... It wasn't full cage match partisanship back in the day, right? What I look for, as we've seen, respectful discourse of the issues, and you need to be able to acknowledge what's being done right. As long as it's being done right for the jurisdiction, the province, the city, the nation, whatever, then fucking let it go, right? Be able to acknowledge it. Say, you know what, this is good for Canadians, right? I got a problem with this over here.
But what if there's no disagreement? Or what if there's no agreement even at that broad level?
Well, again, that's where we've gotten to.
Yeah.
Right? I, kind of as a sidebar here, there was an article here. I can't remember what exact headline or context it was in, but it talked about denialism, right? And I think that's one of the issues we got right now. Like, everyone is unable to have the proper discourse on any given subject. So denialism is a word, or deniers, almost as bad a label as fascist, as terrorist. It's just like...
It's becoming a pejorative.
If you don't agree with me, if you don't toe the party line or the accepted truth, quote unquote, if you try to discuss it with me, try to make a point against it, right? In a reasoned fashion. If you're just trying to open a discussion about it, if you have a question about it, these are all lumped under the category of denialism, and I have a serious problem with that, right? And that's from the left,
right? I think it's like, and I've made this point before. I think it bears mention again that, say, 60 years ago, we agreed that we wanted to take society to the same hill. Right and left disagreed on the route to get there. Whereas now, it's different hills altogether.
I've always loved that analogy.
Yeah,
That
one
is
wants to go to the mountain, the other wants to go to the coastal plain. So any direction away from my destination, I cannot possibly support. Like, it's like you're saying, look, man, if it's good for the people, then let it ride. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But if I see every single step away from my preferred destination, I cannot support it. And I think that's where we're at.
Yep.
We're like, two different hills and that are like, one's west, one's east. And so any step in any direction is met with complete opposition.
But there are still some things that need taken care of, right? I think housing in this nation is a massive one. It's been building for years, and I think it's been talked about for the last 5, 8, 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely been on the radar.
Right?
Yeah.
And now it's reached a crisis point as part of a great big snowball of shit. We've seen a couple of headlines come out in the last couple of weeks. One was the RCMP report basically saying, prepare for some unrest, government of Canada, because Canadians are not happy. We went from, we mentioned this last time, we've gone from like number one, fighting for number 2 as happiest, best places in the world to live, and now we've dropped to, I can't remember, it's 19 or 30 something, right? And the other headline I came across is in terms of productivity as a nation.
Oh, yes.
Canada I think it's the G7. Fuck me, it could well be the G20.
I think it's the G7 because we're not really in the G7. Like, we are not in the top 7 economies in the world. We never have been.
Yeah.
No, but we were part of the G7 notwithstanding.
We were allowed to sit at the table.
Yeah. I think
but in terms of the numbers, we were never in the G7.
That goes back to the Second War.
Yeah. Or it goes back to our inclusion in the G7.
Yeah.
We were there because it was a bargaining chip. The Americans wanted a more friendly voice at the table. They didn't just want them against the Europeans.
Yeah.
So in return for some change to the
definition
settlement mechanism or something like that, they said, okay, Canada gets to sit in on this. But in if you look at the stats, at the economic data, we've never been.
I remember that being raised. I don't think it was the 80s. I think it was the 90s.
Yeah.
I remember an article pointing out that when it came down to it, like Spain was ahead of Canada when it came to economy at the time.
Yeah.
But
it probably was within the G20 because we do fit.
Or certainly the G9.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whichever. So we are second only to Italy, or second last only to Italy in terms of economic prosperity or economic productivity as a nation.
Yes.
That is horrific.
Yes, and that's another issue which has been it's been on a back burner. It hasn't been front and center in the public discourse, although there have been continual warnings. People have been, for 2 decades now, every now and then a newspaper article pops up. Every now and then an analyst or an economist says, hey, guys, this is something we need to pay attention to. Our productivity is steadily declining. And again, it's not a new problem. It's just gotten so bad that now we're really taking notice.
Well, I think
I blame the safety people.
Actually, so do I.
I'm not going to argue against you guys.
I'm not. But okay, so the reason I brought that up, right, returning to the housing as part of a bigger question, and I think we could probably have a whole episode on what we just discussed here, productivity, housing being part of that. Housing has contributed to that. That's gone with the immigration policies and with the
regulation and legislation,
overseas
in the
students and all this shit. Right?
Global competition,
So all this is one great big snowball.
Very multifaceted problem.
I'm going to set aside let's return to the housing concept.
Okay.
Right? You talk about how we don't have a common vision. Right? Well, I think we need to start getting to the point where we can agree, where everyone can agree. Okay, I may want to go to the mountain. I want to go to you might want to go to the plain, the coast. Yeah. But on the plains in between, that's where housing is. Yeah. Right?
Or at least there's housing in both places. No one's living under a tarp here, people.
A solution needs to be found to that.
And if the current Liberal government comes up and proposes a solution, it should not be discounted and picked apart for the sake of it. It should be
not for the sake of it.
should be considered on its merits.
Right.
Right? Which
Right.
I don't feel is the case. And I believe the same
Have they proposed anything?
I believe the same occurs. Yeah, they do. They
What-
did.
what's,
They did.
what's their plan?
There was a press conference in the Maritimes in the last week and a half,
Yeah.
and it was drowned out by protesters on another issue.
Right.
But it was. I don't know the details of the housing proposal. What I'm saying is, it may or may not have merits,
Okay.
and should be considered as such. And I don't believe it will be from the opposition.
You don't believe it will be considered?
I don't
on
believe
its merits?
it'll be considered on its merits by the opposition, and I will go so far as to say, as I don't believe if the situation was reversed, it would be either.
Right.
Like if the Tories were in power and
The Liberals were in
the
opposition.
Liberals would not give it any merits,
Right. They wouldn't give it a fair hearing.
right?
Yeah.
So I mean that's the current situation. I feel both parties should be looking at stuff like that, saying, okay, work together. Okay. These are the merits of your proposal. These are the problems we have with it. Don't use it to make them look bad. Just say, okay, now let's try and
These are
find
the
some
amendments
common
we
ground.
would like to see.
Right? You're a minority government.
Yeah.
Get together and figure this out together. Right? It's one of the reasons I'm pissed off at the NDP, frankly, for just giving this blank check to the Liberals to do whatever they
Do
want.
whatever they want.
Because I think actually a minority parliament is one of the most
Yes. I would agree.
potentially
Yep.
best
Yep.
potentially functioning, as long as that bipartisanship is maintained.
Right. Or a true minority situation is maintained. Yes.
So, and this is one of the reasons I have problems with both sides. But when it comes to Poilievre and the Tories, and then coming to power, although I'm getting to the point where it's like, okay, we need change. However bad it is,
Right.
with Poilievre, bring it on, because it's just getting stupid. But if in the meantime, as part of the campaigning that Poilievre campaigns on, he's just ripping apart the Liberals on this, that, and the other thing without being able to give anything any merits, he'd better have a solution to the housing problem, and he'd better act on it,
What
and
do
he'd
you
better
think-
achieve something.
What do you think of his proposals for housing?
I don't know them. That's why I'm saying, like, if this is a serious problem, right? So A, he better be looking at that. B, he shouldn't be picking apart the Liberals just for the sake of it. And if he is, if he were to get in power, he better fix the fucking problem and not, because if anyone can point to him after the fact, if I can look at Pierre Poilievre after the fact, if he takes power and say, okay, you talked a great game picking apart the Liberals because that's what you do, and just for the sake of getting power, right? But now you're not doing anything about it, right?
Well,
you're no better than Trudeau coming in and not taking care of the
2 cents
Aboriginal
worth,
problem.
I don't think his solutions are going to work. I don't like the policies that he's proposed. I think he's misdiagnosing the problem.
Poilievre.
Yeah. I don't think his policies are going to really significantly move the needle for the housing crisis. I don't think it's going to get better under Poilievre. Like, again, I think he's misdiagnosing the problem. To me, the problem is immigration. We're inflating demand. There's no way we can keep up with housing. Like, you can't. There's just not the
not a
physical
million people a
space.
month or
Yeah.
a million people a quarter or whatever
Yeah,
it is.
not even a million people every 3 years.
Yeah.
There's simply not. I mean,
It's pretty hard to build yourself out of that.
yeah, the amount of space, physical space available to us that is economically viable. You can't just put a house up, in Churchill, Manitoba and say, hey, okay, buddy, go live there. You have to have it in proximity to economic sustenance. You have to have it within a functional proximity to a job, a meaningful job that will pay enough to cover taxes and the cost of living. Plus a little bit left over for someone to fabricate their hopes and their dreams.
Yeah.
So we are limited in the amount of space we have. So you can't just keep on importing people. Like, we're trying to use immigration to solve certain demographic and economic problems. And it's not really suited to doing that. We're finding that out now. and it's creating other problems on the side, one of which is housing. But of course, there are two key issues that the mainstream conservatives refuse to call the spade the spade. One is immigration. They refuse to say, okay, we're going to either stop it or severely curtail it. They don't have the courage and the guts to do that. The other is global warming. They keep saying, oh, we don't like Justin Trudeau's plan for it, but we're not going to come out and call it a hoax and a fraud, or at the very least, a massively overblown problem, which they need to, and they won't. And it's cowardice. Plain old cowardice and hypocrisy on the part of the right.
Well, I think this comes back. This brings me back to.
So say we all.
If the mic wasn't on a stand, you would drop it now.
You betcha. Thus is my thesis.
This is my. This I think
This
brings
is where
us.
you shake your head and say, "I love you, buddy, but you're a raven nutbar."
Actually, this is some of the more lighthearted shit you've put out.
I'm only warming up.
I think this brings us back to the concept of discourse, right? And so this is me challenging and pushing back against.
Yeah.
Calling. First of all, calling it global warming. There's a reason it's called climate change.
Or whatever
Right.
you want to call it. Call it climate warming. Call it global change. Call it
And calling it a hoax, right? I mean,
calling it whatever you want. It makes no difference to me.
call it a hoax. Calling it a hoax doesn't help, right?
Okay.
Because there needs to be. I think there are.
Then let me specify. Let me give you exactly what I'm saying then, as to avoid any confusion. The theory of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming is a hoax. The climate is changing. It's always been changing. It always will be changing. But the idea that it is purely anthropogenic and catastrophic is what I'm calling out as a hoax.
So my response to that is, after 30 years, I believe we're actually in a place to have a discourse at a time when we're incapable of it, right? So many people have bought the Kool-Aid on both sides of the fence, right? That's why I find there are the denialists who are saying it's all bullshit. And these are the ones who are, for the sake of being right and being able to own the opposition, they're like pointing out how many carbon emissions are a result of making an EV battery, right? Or comparing, what it takes to make a wind-powered turbine, and how many emissions it creates, and how many decades it takes for that thing to run for it to make up for building it, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying stuff like that to own, for the sake of just being able to go, I'm right and you're wrong, but not offering any solutions, right? Not even opening the discourse. I was actually in the environmental movement in the mid-90s when climate change was just starting to hit the radar, right? In fact, that's when we went from global warming to climate change, right?
Because I think that came after the turn of the millennium, but I recall that.
No, at the time, I remember it. I was sitting in rooms, and that was the discussion.
Saying we need to change
We need to change
the labeling
because it isn't, because
no warming.
people are putting, I'm a lot warmer than I used to be, so that must mean there's no climate change.
Or the hiatus and
Right.
the decline and then the ClimateGate scandal and such.
And as I've said, so you've said it's a hoax. Me, I'm not convinced.
That it's a hoax.
I'm not convinced either way.
Okay.
I think I've gotten to the point, having drunk the Kool-Aid, and strangely enough, our discussions about COVID, as I've mentioned before, have kind of opened the door to this conversation. I'm like, okay, you know what? Let's all take a deep fucking breath, take a step back, look at some numbers together in common, and figure out what's really going on, instead of just playing pokey chest and feeling good about being right, and about feeling good about you feeling bad. Like, it's just.
I would love it if we did that. I think that would be the best thing that could happen from my point of view.
Well, that's why I want to take the word hoax and kind of bin it, right?
Well,
You
I
just
feel
go,
that
okay.
if you look at the numbers, it reveals that the catastrophic anthropogenic portion is a hoax. If you look at the numbers, I feel the data bears that out.
I would suggest that maybe you and I could provide the example for that, but I'm not interested. I'm bored. I don't like the thought.
Well, also, like you and I can have a rational debate all we want. If it doesn't leave the room, what good is it? Well, no, that's not true. I mean, he's got to start somewhere.
He does have to start somewhere.
He's
But
got to start somewhere.
ultimately, those conversations aren't incentivized right now in the current media and political environment, right?
Yeah.
Like the podcast, great for having those rational, reasoned discussions. As long as everybody comes at it in good faith. But it's just outside of that, the niche that is this medium, right? It's not incentivized. It's not incentivized in legacy media. It's not incentivized in the political.
That is for sure.
Right? It's the incentive structure that have to change. Now, the niche of podcasts, I think, is having an effect, and I think people generally are just getting sick. Like, I mean, if you look at the American political spectrum, the people who are a pox on both their houses outnumber both parties put together. Right?
Like the bad actors outnumber.
No, the moderates. He's saying the moderates.
The people in the middle who hate the Democrats, who hate the Republicans.
Oh, okay, like the independents.
Yeah, independents.
In the American phraseology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Outnumber both parties put together.
Okay.
Right? Like
Certainly each one.
the
I don't think they've got a 50% majority as independents, but
I think they're over now. Both parties now combined can only muster about 40% of the electorate.
Really?
In the US.
That's quite interesting.
well,
understandable.
Oh yeah, it's a very. I mean, and the things that always struck me is like the American system would be the most functional system with like they could have like 20 parties, and it would probably actually work better than it does now, right? Because it's. I mean, you get if you get too much choice, then you become paralyzed by choice. But
wasn't there a time in the
American
1840s where they had, say, 1820, 1840, where they had three parties?
Yeah, because, and actually even into the 1920s, because when Teddy Roosevelt ran for his second term, because he ran for a non-consecutive second term, which he didn't win, he ran as a Whig.
Right, yeah, because the Whigs were the dominant opposition of the Democrats.
Yeah, the Democrats...
Prior to the Civil War, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, because the founding two parties were the Democrats and the Whigs.
Yeah.
And then the Whigs basically, folded up after the Civil War because they were kind of pro-slave, kind of on the same side.
Yeah, they weren't as dedicated anti-slavery as the
Republicans were.
Because that was their cause célèbre.
Yeah.
That was their oh God, what is it? Raison d'être. That was what they were all about. Do you have a phrase in English for that, for God's sakes?
No.
I look to you, man of letters. What are you doing over there?
And I
Just
speak
leaving me
French.
hanging. Yes!
raison d'être is
Good God.
reason of being. Right?
Well, how come we don't have a
It's
snappy-
English. We steal everything from everybody else
How
anyways.
come? Yeah, I guess. Why don't we have anything snappy of our own? Why don't we got to borrow it from the French? Anyway,
Or the Germans.
I blame Voltaire. Anyway, so go on.
Why don't we have an English term for Schadenfreude, right?
Yeah.
Because Schadenfreude exists, I guess.
I guess. Okay. So anyway, so we're talking about the demise of the Whigs and the rise of the Republicans, but they did have a three-party system for a while.
For a while, but the downfall of the Whigs, I think, in the post-Civil War era was pretty precipitous, right? And
So
they
how
were
would that-
they were kind of a runt party by the time.
So
Roosevelt was
how
using
do you
them
think
to-
that would function? If you had, say, four. Okay, let's just use for the sake of easy nomenclature. Let's create some names. You got the Republicans and Democrats. Let's throw in Greens, and we'll say Christian Democrats, to borrow a European concept.
All right.
So let's say you got those four parties running in the United States.
I will notice
would
you
that-
left out the most viable third party in the United States, the one that actually gets candidates on
the
both.
libertarians.
Yeah.
Who are you again?
The Libertarian Party is in the
So
U.S.
I was
is a wreck
actually-
right now. But
It's funny because I was going to say when you spoke up for the
Okay,
first time in a while, I was going to say, "Who are you again?"
Let's
So,
say so let's say Democrats, Social Democrats,
Uh-huh.
Christian Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians.
Sure.
5 parties.
Yep.
How would a presidential election go? Would it be first past the post? Would that be single member plurality?
Well, no, because see, the thing is, different states have different ways of awarding the electoral college votes. It would still be based on electoral college votes. So whoever won them, it would change probably the minimum number of votes because it would be whoever got the most votes, electoral college votes, right?
Right.
So some states award all their votes to one candidate, to whoever the winning candidate is in their
almost
state.
all states do.
But some states,
Some states.
proportionally
Okay.
award the college votes.
Not many though.
Not many. No, most states are all or
For
nothing.
the most part, it would be
It's all or
single
nothing.
member
Whoever wins the
plurality.
state wins the college votes.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Okay. With a couple of exemptions that would be kind of maybe a wild card that might make certain states a swing state.
Yeah.
Okay.
For a presidential race.
For president. Okay. So
But their
how would
Congress,
this affect
but their
Congress?
right? The Congress, be either the Senate or the House, can function either way, right? It just means that the two big parties lose power, like their whips are almost useless.
Right. So you
But-
would get like almost like European parliaments.
Yeah. So now
within the
there
House
needs
and
to
the
be
Senate.
now there needs to be consensus building.
And I think that's where the American system actually works best, because,
would
especially
work
when it
Yeah.
was bipartisan.
Yeah.
Right? Because the analogy I always heard is that you would get Southern Democrats who'd be more right wing than
Yeah.
Or
Northern
they certainly
Republicans.
didn't see
They would
eye to
probably-
eye on social issues with, say, the
Right. So you would get
As a detail, like a thing, they would probably, the House of Representatives would probably have to come up with new rules governing the Speaker of the House,
so
that
the
they
House of
weren't constantly
Representatives
paralyzed by
is the one that's based on
House of Commons.
one's by representation by population, the other's representation by region. Which one has equal representation for each state? Is that the Senate or is that the House?
No, they.
that's the Senate.
Where
depends-
every state gets the same number of
yeah, the
representatives.
Senate. The Senate.
That's
There's
the
They
two
get-
senators per state.
2 senators each.
Okay.
But
So,
the House is kind of rep by
yeah,
party.
so like New York and California have more seats in the House than, say, Wyoming.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so now I know which one's which. Right.
Now-
New York and California combined have more seats than Wyoming.
Totally. I think each one, like, oh my God, you'd have to add up the entire Midwest to equal New York and California, wouldn't you?
They're probably the whole nation.
Yeah, California lost a couple recently in their redistricting because
Sure, because they've been bleeding population.
yeah,
since
because
COVID,
I think
yeah.
they lost and Texas picked up at their expense.
Yeah, Texas and Florida.
Florida might have picked up one as well, but but they have to come. The House would have to come to some kind of rules where it could
Mm-hmm.
function, and they couldn't. And you couldn't just oust the speaker. Like the present rules that the speaker's operating under, like.
Yeah.
If one member of the Republican caucus says, I don't like the speaker, then everything's paralyzed
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
got to
yeah.
re-elect a new speaker. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's unworkable. And so that's unworkable. They'd have to change the rules and kind of cement them in.
Well, some of that's party rules as opposed to
Well, it's
House rules.
It's House rules, but the party. The thing is, like their House and the Senate can both vote to change
What is the
their parliamentary
role of
rules.
the House leader? The House leader decides on the agenda?
Well,
it decides whether
the
something's going to be
speaker-
presented. Yeah.
So okay, it's kind of confusing because in the same position, the equivalent position in the Senate is called the Senate Majority Leader,
Right.
but in the House of Representatives, it's the Speaker of the House
Okay.
who is elected by the majority party.
Okay.
So in our
Or technically speaking, is elected by the House, but really what comes down to is the majority.
yeah, it's the majority, but the majority votes of the House.
Yeah.
So, well, the same as like our Speaker is usually
Sure.
elected by the majority party,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
Of,
I get what you're saying.
but just the
Yeah.
Speaker. The Speaker in the House has much more power. He's not a ceremonial position.
So
because,
what does the
he,
Speaker of the House of Representatives do?
his most important thing is yes, he gets to set the legislative agenda.
So he decides what bills come before the House in what order.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that is.
He doesn't have the power to say no to a particular bill, but he has the power to
yeah,
place
he
it.
can.
at
He
the end.
can because
He can.
because the Ukraine bill
Okay, so
has been tabled
Yeah,
for weeks because who's it Johnson
yeah,
Mike Johnson is
yeah.
the present Speaker of the House.
has
So
not
he
brought forward,
says-
and the Senate has already
Right, the Senate's already approved it.
Yeah.
But so that the Speaker of the House could say, I'm not going to put that before a vote. I'm just going to backlog it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, or he could kill it at committee or whatever, and he's also responsible for committee assignments.
Okay.
So
I think getting back to the well, I mean, I was going to say third party system. When we're talking about 2+ party
Yeah.
system, both in the U.S. and Canada, we have to get to the point where there is actually a viable third party
Yeah.
or more, right? Because even if
You don't, in the U.S. system, you don't necessarily need, because you can have a swing vote, an independent or a green or a libertarian or whatever, who can be a swing vote in the House.
let me
That'll
talk
have much more impact than you'll have in the Canadian system.
I'm talking about the executive level,
Right.
right?
And Canada or the U.S.?
Both.
Okay.
So just federally in both, like the leader of the nation. Because we've never had anything but Tories and Liberals in Canada.
It's at the
Yeah,
federal-
we're effectively a
at the
two-party
federal-
state as well. Like we,
Right?
federal
It's
level.
funny how...
Especially, and it waxes and wanes with time, but right now we are essentially a two-party state.
And I think even at the provincial level, I was going to bring up the fact, some provinces have had, 3 parties. I think Saskatchewan possibly 4 over time.
Yeah.
But it's always because one of
Or
some
say like
party.
BC right now is essentially a 4-party. The political scene.
Well, the Greens have actually been the balance of power.
Yeah, the Greens, the New Democrats, the Conservatives, and the Liberals. Or no, they're not the Conservative, not the Liberals anymore. What do they call themselves?
I can't know.
So, I don't know. The Liberals in BC realized that brand was trash, and so they've changed their name to something. BC
No, I
United
think
or something like that. Or some,
I haven't paid enough attention. That's
There's
recent.
some other name.
I mean, they didn't used to be conservatives. They used to be Socrats.
Yeah,
But
the
Socrats
BC
are gone. And
Van
now
der Sam
yeah,
fucked that
yeah,
over too,
yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
and I think that's what's happening. Even if you look at the Maritimes, where you get NDP governments, I think that's just because the NDs they grab the center left at the expense of the Liberals,
it
right?
Seems
So
that
it's
one party coalesces, like one party, be it on either side of the aisle,
Yeah.
will gradually absorb the other parties on that side of the aisle with them
Exactly.
and create a united kind of big tent approach.
so you've either got Tories versus Liberals,
Yeah.
or I think the Liberals kind of cease to function because
Yeah.
the Tories grab the farther right of them, and the NDs grab the
say,
farther left of them.
Saskatchewan, it's the New Democrats and the Saskatchewan Party.
Yeah.
And there's no Tories, there's no Liberals, but it's the same kind of camps.
Yeah, but I mean, Saskatchewan Party, that's effectively the same as our Tory Party, right?
Yeah.
And the role played by the Saskatchewan New Democrats is essentially the same as the federal Liberals.
Yeah.
They're
So,
they coalesced, they absorbed, or like the Alberta NDP kind of absorbed the Alberta Party. They
Yeah.
flared up, but it kind of
I think
Absorbed
the Alberta
it, yeah.
Party was an interesting concept. Just was that
Well,
Mel
and-
Hurtigs, or Mel Hurtigs was national?
no,
wasn't it?
that was the former Edmonton mayor who tried to give that some life.
Oh, Stephen Mandel.
yeah,
Yeah.
he tried to.
And then the Alberta Liberals they even exist anymore? There can't be more.
See,
They still exist, but they're not a.
this is
just
is
like the Alberta Social Credit still exists.
Yeah.
this is the challenge, right? The challenge is that for something like that to survive, it has to be viable. It has to be able to come in on a wave and actually achieve something. Otherwise, it's just
Yeah.
split. The Alberta Party it's a threat to the NDs. In
Well,
this province.
It
actually,
was. And I think that's why the New Democrats really put an emphasis on winning those members back to the New Democrats.
I don't know that it's a good example of a functioning system, but the Israelis actually, the Knesset is a really divided parliament, right?
Yes.
Like, and it still manages to function with I don't know, like 10 parties,
Yeah.
with
or
membership,
yeah.
right? Like
There are some multi-party systems that are chronically unstable. Italy.
yeah,
And then there are some that are
Some plural. One example.
well, I'm going to throw the Dutch in there too.
well, and Israel, the Israeli system, they seem to have an election every 15 months,
Yeah,
right?
And the
Like-
Israelis, I was going to say that they're also not. Well, who's more chaotic, the Italians or the Israelis? Flip a coin.
yeah,
So yeah, I'll throw them in there. As being a chronically unstable, perpetual coalitions coming and going, or like there's always a crisis in the parliament as someone's trying to put together a coalition to avoid yet another election, right?
Yeah.
It seems that these multi-party systems that is the danger, in that there's a
Yeah.
lack of stability.
And were that to happen, like were the fringe parties to become more credible in Canada and gain more votes and more support, I think we would end up more in that. I think the American system is uniquely adaptable to that.
Yes, because it has such division of powers. Specifically, it separates the legislative and the executive.
Exactly, right?
Which parliamentary systems tend not to do.
No, yeah, exactly. So the Westminster system. So exactly, right? If you can't get a decent government and then you're also forming the executive out of the parliament. Then,
are you familiar with Australia's system?
Not really.
Neither have I, and I need to learn more about it because I understand that they call it Washminster.
It could be, yeah.
And
I
that
think
they tried to blend the best parts of what they saw from the Westminster Parliament and the
American system. I'd be curious to find out what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do some reading on that.
Because my understanding is essentially the same as us. They just...
Yeah, I don't know, because I mean they have prime minister, right? They don't have president. So.
I think they gave more of a role to their Senate.
That could be. Okay.
And that kind of cleaves off most of the legislative power of Parliament. Mm-hmm. That Parliament is now largely, I could be wrong. I'm throwing a dart here.
Interesting.
But my guess is that, like, if I was going to make one single improvement, I think the single change that would make the most beneficial effect to Canada's system is a Triple E Senate. Because then it would balance, you would have representation by region, which balances the representation by population of the House. Of Parliament. Yeah, of the Commons.
Yeah.
Then if you had an effective Senate that had the power to reject legislation completely, or had equal legislatory powers to the Commons, it can create legislation, send it for approval to the Commons, and the Commons can create legislation, send it for approval to the Senate, but either house has full powers to cancel legislation.
So you are talking about an American...
And of course, you elect it.
What are the 3 E's in the Triple E again?
Elected, effective, equal.
Equal, yeah.
Equal.
So all provinces would have the same representation.
What about the territories?
I don't think they would.
Fuck them.
Because they're not provinces. Now, what you could do is say, why not have all of the territories combine for...
That's what occurred to me. Okay.
Kind of like let's pick a number. Let's say 3 senators per province.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then why not...
All the territories would have 3 senators?
Yeah, let all 3 territories have a senator. Or sorry, all 3 territories.
3 territories.
Yeah,
3
territories, 3 senators.
Yeah.
So that the kind of like the territories themselves...
A Senate of 33?
Yeah. And that way you...
That's a lot of empty seats, man. Don't we have an actual Senate...
No, I don't
chamber?
We do have an actual Senate chamber,
but it's not big.
It's not huge.
It doesn't need to be big. We don't need hundreds of members, right? Which is always a problem.
Well, I think in my lifetime, the number just kept going up and up. It was fuck it, I'll just create some more senators to pass legislation.
I remember watching a lecture probably a decade ago. Not much of a lecture. There were, I think it was John Robson was giving a talk, and it was a group of people around a table in a restaurant. Right. Literally is what it was. Yeah. But he was talking about how he would, and I kind of agree with him, is generally, it's better for the parliament to be stupidly big, because then it's harder to bribe individual people, right? If you had, he's like, because he was arguing, the people at the table, it was a libertarian meeting.
Bent to it, yeah.
Well, there was it was some kind of Ontario libertarian group.
Oh, okay.
That identified as fully as libertarian, and he was like, and they were in like, we need to shrink the house. It's too small. He's like, no, it should be double, or at least double.
Really? And that was his argument.
And his argument is just because then if you have 1,000 people, you can't bribe them all for their vote. There's not enough parliamentary secretary positions in this position and that, right? And it's much harder to bribe 1,000 people than it is to bribe 400.
But if you've got too many representatives who all have an equal voice, then you can shut down debate on any issue just by prolonging it, by giving everyone a chance to speak on it, right?
Yeah.
But backbenchers are backbenchers. But
but I hear what both of you guys are saying. So
then a smaller
the solution would be find a middle road.
And then a smaller Senate is the same thing.
Yeah. Find a way so that you have more numbers.
I would be inclined to put our Senate at 100.
But I would be
or 103.
Well, we've got so interestingly, with the numbers we just came up with, 3 per province, 1 for each territory. That's 33. Triple that, that's 99.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? That's a good one. See, that would work too, right? That would work. Especially if you have like a
and I think 9's a good number. The other thing I would do is I would stagger the elections.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
that you can never, the entire Senate never goes to the polls at the same time. Only half. And it's always staggered from the federal elections.
Yeah.
So we're going to have, every 2 years, we're going to have either a Senate election, Commons election. Other half of the Senate, Commons, other half of the Senate. So that way it balances out. Because, politics tends to go in waves.
I don't want the 2-year thing. It's so you're talking like 4-year terms, but offset for both.
Isn't it 6 years for the Senate?
Well,
Lifetime
for
the Senate.
for the U.S. Senate. It's 6
the
years.
U.S., yeah.
I see.
I mean, because we're talking about a function of threes, anyways.
I see my inclination. I think we're almost to the podcast I've always wanted to have of our dream constitution. But
Okay.
I would probably give senators a long term and then term limit them to 1, and then you get the full pension.
You have my attention. Keep talking.
So if you term limit to 1, like it's a 10 or 12-year term or something like
Okay.
that,
Okay.
then you take the re-election and the campaigning and all that
Take
stuff.
that out.
It's gone, right?
Yep.
You get the full pension, you get the full ride afterwards that the Commons guys got to do 2 or 3 terms to get.
Yep.
I mean, there's talk of in the States. Some people talk. It's a minority conversation of that they should all be term limited to 12 years. So that's 6 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate. And
But you're saying only one election, we got that guy for 12 years.
you got that guy for 12 years. That's a reasonable amount of time to become proficient at the job. See, because presumably you've got a Triple E Senate now. The cabinet, if we're still doing the executive.
Yeah, the
I
executive.
mean, I think the cabinet can pick senators for the cabinet anyway.
they can,
as
yes.
now, so you
In
would
fact,
still do that.
you don't even need a sitting member
Yeah.
for the cabinet. You can take a citizen off the street
That's
as your
true.
cabinet.
Actually, we could do that in this nation. With the numbers that we just had, 33, 99, that's 99, that's 9 per province,
Yeah.
right? Then you have 3 of those come up in an election every 4 years.
Like a third of it.
A third of it every 4 years.
Right.
That's your 12
Stagger
years.
it.
That's your 12 years.
Yeah, you still stagger because that's how the U.S. Senate
Right.
is. Right?
It's not the whole Senate goes up.
No, it's staggered.
The only question in my mind, because I love the concept of 12 years and the lack of, if you're not campaigning for re-election,
That's right.
12 years
You're
is
not
a reasonable
beholden
amount.
to that money cycle.
In
Yeah.
fact, I'm thinking those 12 years,
And then I
The
moved
only
the House to
question-
4 years.
the only question becomes, in those 4 years, those 12 years, are we going to lose people who are going to say,
Yeah, but then you have by-election.
Yeah.
And then the by-election is only to fulfill that term, but then that person, you could say that person could be eligible to run for a second term because he was only fulfilling the first. You could say that, or you could
You
you
could
could
say
go
that.
yay or nay on that.
Yep. You could say that.
but- right?
Or we could just leave that seat empty.
Or he could leave that seat empty.
We leave it empty.
no, as a province,
I
wouldn't want
think
that.
it's better to have a by-election, honestly.
Or maybe, or okay. I'm not saying I'm wedded to this idea. I'm throwing shit against the wall. To see
Holy
what
shit, the
sticks.
agent of chaos.
That's exactly what it is. Okay, so Joe Smith he wins the election for Senate. He's got a 12-year term.
Right.
6 years in, he says, my health is failing. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I got to leave. So he's a senator for Manitoba.
Yeah.
The premier of Manitoba
Gets to pick his replacement.
gets to pick his replacement.
That's
Gets
what
to
happens.
make an appointee to fill out the remainder of the 6 years. But that guy can't run.
Yeah, that's well, in the American system. I mean, we've had this conversation before, I think, and I said that I would like a system with the effective Senate. I would like a system where the provinces pick who the senators are,
Right.
whether they have an election or whether they appoint.
whether they're
I don't
appointed,
care. But so in the American system, yeah, if a senator leaves, or usually if he dies midterm or leaves, but yeah, even if he leaves midterm, I think then the governor appoints his replacement. Oftentimes, if he dies, it's his wife. It's a tradition for some reason to make it his wife.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think of that? Where the premier, say Joe Smith's from Manitoba, so 6 years, he had legitimate reason. He has to quit. His health is failing. So then the premier of Manitoba gets to appoint the senator. However, the appointee may not run in the next election.
I would say, okay, so there's a lot of potential variations on what you're saying right there. At halfway through, 6-year term, that's not unreasonable, right? But
What's
do
the
they,
weakness?
but do they get a full pension? Do they get are they effective? 6 years not bad, but
I'll say 6 years they get the full pension
okay. Now let's say it's
because
10,
that matches the commons.
now it's 10 years in.
Okay, say 10 or say 10. So he's only got 2
So
years.
only
left.
got 2 years.
He does not get full pension,
Am I just
and he's not allowed to run.
but who wants the job?
Oh, there's lots of guys who take the job. A retiree who's already got a full pension, but still has lots of energy, lots of desire to help the nation.
Or you could have them, okay, they can run, but the years that they've served as appointee can be calculated against the 12 that come thereafter. So maybe
Yeah,
there
but then we're perpetually
Oh,
shortchanging that one term.
Then you're sure. Yeah, you're screwing shit up. You always want to get
No,
your
you-
stuff back on cycle.
I'm
right?
saying you round up, you round down, whatever, right? And then you might end up one year you're reelecting
So like
4
that,
instead
so
of 3.
technically, a guy could serve, say, in that case, he could serve 14 years. Like he could do 2 as a lame duck, or not a lame duck. Say
2 as a replacement.
Yeah, 2 as a replacement, and then serve a full 12 years as an elected.
What
member.
are the
I
probably
would-
no more than 14.
I would still hold firm. I like the idea of just you may not run.
Well,
I think that's a better.
I think we're splitting hairs at this point. I mean, it's,
I just think you're going to get a different kind of personality if the guy knows he can't run.
Yeah,
I'm here for 2 years.
it's a different incentive structure.
Yeah,
Right.
And I think that's healthy. Have
And it's
different
the
incentives.
incentive structure
Yeah.
that's the important thing,
Yeah.
rather than the individual people. I think.
Yeah, so I like the idea of maybe creating different incentive structures within there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, it's better that the Senate has a different incentive structure than the House.
Absolutely.
Right, and
Yep.
a different perspective. That's the whole point.
Okay,
of
so
the
for
chamber
12-year
of second sober
terms-
thought that we call it, right?
12-year terms. How do we avoid the Jody Gondek rule or the Jody Gondek possibility where we get someone in there who is absolutely unsuited for the job, but now we're stuck with them for 12 years? Do we have a recall mechanism?
Probably.
How do we do it?
It would have to be at the province.
Or do
The province would have to recall their own senator, or the territory would have
okay,
to recall
so,
their own senator.
okay. So
who's Jody Gondek?
she's mayor of Calgary. A very problematic mayor of Calgary.
From your point of view.
Well,
I read something
yeah,
about this.
yeah.
There's some now.
a guy did try a recall petition,
Yes.
except it failed because he needed 500,000 signatures in a given
Yeah.
period of time, and he wasn't able to get that. But there's kind of a movement within Calgary. See, the issue that bugs a lot of people about Gondek is that she campaigned as a very moderate, middle of the road politician.
Okay.
When she's hard radical left,
Okay.
like Sarah Hoffman, radical left. Or no. Who's the real nutbar in it? She was running for the.
Don't ask me to name
Whatever.
NDP people.
Anyway, like she's hard left. A coalition of public sector unions and environmental groups bankrolled Gondek and 3 or 4 members who are running for the school boards, and got them in place because they were handpicked by this kind of, like, you could almost call it a political action committee. These bankrollers, and they campaigned as moderates, but then felt like they wanted to bring in their political agenda. So there's a movement within Calgary to say we need political parties at the municipal level for for city council and school boards, because people need to get an understanding of who someone is beyond just what they say on their speeches. They need to have an understanding of okay, where do you generally fall on the spectrum? Kind of like birds of a feather. We need to know what company you keep. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the secondary effect of this petition. So Gondek was upset a lot of people because she kind of hid who she really was. But then the deeper problem was, okay, let's say we got rid of Gondek. How do we prevent somebody from doing that again? And so then this is the movement that's kind of a grassroots thing in Calgary. We should have political parties at that municipal level.
Wow, you know what? You've wow. Holy shit, so many thoughts are occurring to me. This is very, fundamental stuff when it comes to politics, right? Politics are politics are politics. It's people making speeches. It is that public face. It is getting votes. If you get the votes, you get the fucking votes.
Yeah,
we're just talking about.
There is merit to the argument, I think, though, because if someone's in a political party, I have a rough idea of how they will respond to an unprecedented event. For example, COVID. There was absolutely nothing within living memory to guide us on how to respond to COVID. And it's the kind of once in a generation event.
No, what's once in 4 generations.
Yeah, there you
Once
go.
in a century.
Yeah, even more, right? So stuff like that, like I guess it's not a good term, but it's handy shorthand. I'll say a black swan event. Like, if I want to know how someone is going to respond to a black swan event, I don't look to what they've said. I look to their party. Because I know what the rough general principles are of a group of people. So I've got a good idea of how they're going to respond to an unprecedented event.
Yeah, but what's the event? I think it's going to
anything, the unknown. So I like the idea of parties because it gives me an idea of, like, your speech is telling me.
Oh, you're talking about
spoken.
parties at the municipal level.
Yes.
I've wondered about that before because
it tells me, like, I know what you say, but your party tells me what you feel.
I'm trying to, for some reason, it's occurred to me because I haven't seen this in Edmonton, but somewhere people run on a slate system civically.
Yeah. Yep.
Right, which is like a party. I don't know if that's Canadian or U.S. or British or where it's coming to me from.
I think it's happening in a couple of municipalities.
Because I think that's one way. I'm kind of yay or nay on that, right? I like it for a lot of reasons. Some of them, but in a lot of ways, what I like about the fact that people just run as individuals at the municipal level is it gets us, especially nowadays, we need it. It gets us out of our political laziness, right? We actually have to pay fucking attention.
Does it?
It does. For me, the
example of Calgary says it doesn't.
Hold that thought. I've had to actually go look for the candidates for municipal elections.
Yeah, well, you have
and read their platforms.
But the problem is people don't do that anymore.
Right, I know they don't. Right, but and that in itself is again an argument for how politics works functionally.
And also, politicians at the municipal level hide their platforms. Like, I remember looking at the candidates in my riding. They're
for councillor.
Yeah, for councillor.
In your ward.
And school board.
Yeah.
It was all pablum. It was all meaningless platitudes that were like at 35,000 feet. There was no particular statement of background philosophy. I'm going to increase community engagement, and I'm going to improve our infrastructure, and I'm going to, give us a meaningful seat on council. Tells me nothing about your political philosophy.
I disagree. It tells you enough because I know you're smart enough to read through stuff and at least be able to infer a lot from what they're saying. Right?
No, but
you can infer the specifics.
If everybody gives you the same kind of buzzword pablum,
you
don't know who believes what, and you don't know because you don't know any of these people personally.
Yeah, I had to Google search all of these people, look for articles that mention them, say 3-4 years prior. Were they a volunteer on this and that provincial election? Say, okay, now I know what that guy's affiliation is. I'm comfortable with giving that guy my vote. Or I'm not comfortable with giving that guy my vote.
Yeah. Let's say.
So, like, our last municipal election here, we had this conversation with our previous third guest in the Lost podcast that never happened.
Yeah.
It was right in the cusp of the municipal election here when we did that one. And so she gave me shit because I basically picked who I was going to vote for.
Yep.
I went through their pamphlets, and this guy was the least interventionist,
right.
And I showed you the pamphlet.
Least activist,
and he's like, okay, this guy seems like the mostly conservative,
or the least worst option.
The least worst option, right?
Yeah.
And of course, our previous
Your predecessor.
Your predecessor.
Token leftist, yeah.
Token leftist. She actually worked in the
Short Park.
the public relations office of the county.
Of the county, yeah.
And she being the token leftist, she was apoplectic that I would vote for this guy.
Yeah.
And then one of her things is he's anti-masking, and I wanted to say to her, well, you're anti-masking because you've never met me before this morning, and you walked into my house without a mask, and you didn't know me from Adam, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, but.
But yeah.
But anyway, I went off the pamphlets because I didn't know who any of these people were.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
this
right.
guy had a small businessman, and this guy was a small businessman, and this guy had this history in the county. And because in Sherwood Park we're voting, because Sherwood Park is not a city.
That's right. It's county.
Well, Strathcona is a county. Sherwood Park's a hamlet.
Oh, right.
Sherwood Park itself, even though it's the largest city in the county, is a hamlet.
Yeah. Legally.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it's the county seat, and the election for Sherwood Park is the election for the county.
I mean, speaking of hypocrisy, we trust the right wing to diss the leftists for walking in and trusting you not to make them sick. I mean, what the fuck?
We're a wicked.
Oh my god! But actually, okay. So your point is well taken about municipal politics, about how people aren't paying attention to what they should be when they're making that choice. But that to me comes back to the need.
I think Patty's pointing out that it's so hard to figure out who these people actually are because you don't know any of them from Adam, right?
Yeah.
You know,
And I think it becomes
unless the person is individually known to you.
Yeah. And it's more important the bigger the municipality.
Right.
If we're talking about, say, like the town of Westlock, the influence of Westlock City Council is very limited.
Yeah.
There's limits as to what it can do. But the influence of Edmonton and Calgary city councils are province-wide. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're
And Edmonton is
bigger
big
issue.
enough. Like I don't know how many wards we have now. 11,
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
right? So, but there's over 1 million people covering that. So there's no way that your councillor can be individually known to more
Right.
than a handful of people
That's right.
in the ward. So
And the actions of that city council have provincial
Pretty big
repercussions.
repercussions, yeah.
So I think it's more important that there is.
And then I almost wonder if the council should be bigger, right? Like, because like the New York City Council,
Yeah.
is the freaking size is almost the House of Representatives. It's huge. Like it's not quite. It's over 100 people, right? That are councillors. and
Yeah,
aldermen,
you know
right?
what? I wouldn't be completely opposed to that
Right. Now it's
because how big a city council is pretty small.
Edmonton City Council.
Yeah, I mean the city council is like there's 8 people at any given time plus the mayor.
Something like that, right? I mean,
Holy
Anyway.
shit! So we've got 11 people, 11 wards.
11 wards.
So now we're talking 9 per ward, and there's no party platforms, and nobody's paying attention. Well, that should be interesting. that would make politics really interesting in the city, right?
Well, it's certainly made municipal politics. I don't know why, but it seems to favor the left.
Oh my God! Here we go. What the fuck?
Well, think about it.
Oh, the
Think about it.
left, the fucking left
No,
is
no,
getting
no,
it
no,
all. Oh my God!
Before you put on the tinfoil beanie, Alberta is a very, on the whole, much more conservative culture, small c, than, say, British Columbia or Ontario. And Calgary,
actually, I'm
even
going to
more
stop
so.
you there just
Okay.
for a sec to
Okay.
amend
Okay.
what you just said. Alberta is more, on the whole, more small C conservative than the lower mainland of
Sure.
BC.
Yeah, Lower Mainland. Yes, this is an important point. Because Fort St. John, no, that shit's a wash. So yeah, say Lower Mainland, double V. Which I do want to mention before the end of this podcast.
Oh, we've yeah. We got
so-
lots to say.
Yet, and Calgary is much more conservative in its culture than Edmonton. Yet, if you're going to ask me which is more progressive over the last, say, 15 years, Calgary City Council or Edmonton City Council, I kind of got to go towards Calgary, you know? So, in this current format, it seems, I mean, can you name any real conservative councillors who have really kind of made a name for themselves in either Edmonton or Calgary in the last, say, 20 years?
I couldn't name you a councillor.
Oh,
Mike Nickel,
Mike
Yeah,
Nickel.
Mike Nickel,
Mike
yeah.
Nickel.
Nickel and Zia Dyke. They're the only ones I could mention at all.
Yeah, but here's a challenge to you. Could you name any others?
Any other
Any other councillors?
my favorite of all was Tucker Gomberg. That guy, I love that guy.
Yeah, just based on the name,
Oh
right?
no, just because he was nuts. He was absolutely insane.
He was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
He
yeah.
was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Unfortunately, I do not remember the names, but I do remember faces.
So, but that's what I'm saying. So,
But also for the opposite reason, that I found that they were undesirably progressive. And I even my current representative is on that list, and she came to my door. She was door knocking, right, and she comes up to my door, and I see her because I recognize who she is. And before she even gets up on the stoop, I said, "You're that hardcore progressive, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "You're not welcome here." And she, turn around, gone. She didn't even say, "Well, why do you feel that way?" Like, nope, just turn around, gone. Like waving on their team. Next house, next house, next house.
it's the haircut.
Could be.
Yeah. The haircut we kind of all share, but you know.
I guess.
Well, I find
Anyway.
it, like I said, I found it interesting that you brought up, oh, can you name any conservative? Well, we managed to name two.
Okay, how
and
about mayors?
right wing?
Yeah. I mean, if you add mayors on, okay, Nenshi, Gondek, oh God, how can I can't
Decor.
Iverson, 100%. Our guy now,
Amarji Sohi.
yeah, Sohi. Craptastic.
Mandel?
The,
Jan Reimer.
Jan
that's
Reimer.
what I was looking for. Jan Reimer, yeah, daughter of a prominent NDP politician.
Yeah. She
So-
was definitely not a mystery. So he was not a mystery because he was used to be a
Nope,
former.
they were pretty
federal
obvious
level.
as to who they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lawrence Decor
Yeah.
and Ralph Klein are the last two prominent right-wing municipal politicians.
Well, yeah. I mean, and
They-
Decor went
they-
on to run. They
Yeah,
Ran
on
as
to
a
run
liberal,
the
yeah.
Alberta
Yeah.
Liberal Party, but yeah.
Those are the last two
Skyrocketing
really
into
prominent.
obscurity.
Well, he died of cancer,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, he didn't kill the Alberta Liberal Party. It died. I think,
No.
a little
Oh, yeah.
after him,
But
I'm
he
not
had-
blaming him. I'm
He
saying, but-
had the most
yeah, he had the
success,
as an Alberta Liberal.
but he ran from the right.
Yeah.
Right, so I think it was a tragic. I think he would have been a very good. He could have brought down the conservative dynasty.
Yeah.
He could have, and he was on his way to do it. It's just he was taken from us too soon. Anyway, you got 4 points, man.
I got 4 points.
You're
And-
putting
and-
bullets in a gun. So
The reason I've got these because they're all
Before you forget
interconnected,
it.
and this is to remind me I've got four things
you
because
need a
I'm gonna
notepad.
I'm gonna forget
Yeah,
the
you never
fourth
bring
one.
notes. Anyway, on your points, never.
Okay.
So starting with the municipal and how nobody pays attention to them, and yet people get elected, right? So people are going out and voting; they're basing it on something. So that is, again, that to me is the nature of politics. It's the messaging. That's why we see, and it's ridiculous. But in the States, in particular, they're always talking about how many funds does Trump have versus Biden, right?
Yeah.
To get that message out, because it's all about the messaging, and therefore people get out and vote for that. So interestingly, at the municipal level here, it's happening. So who's getting voted for? Why? If there's nothing to choose between them and nobody's paying attention, something's happening.
Well,
right?
that's the argument is
Right.
that the deep left, the public sector unions, and the environmental groups are funding
The people with get out the vote mechanisms, right?
Yeah,
Right.
the big money backing, which is being manifested through volunteer labor.
Right.
Is favoring the radical left-wing candidates,
And
and
then
not
there
the
are people-
moderate left, the hard,
Okay, but
crazy
okay, if that's where shit is, that's where shit. Like I said, my argument right now is that's just politics,
left. Okay,
right? All right. The second point comes to the municipal bit that you're talking about, right? Like the
that the current system tends to benefit. The
well,
left?
no. I'm setting that one. So I'm just laughing.
okay.
I'm just laughing internally at that. I'm cackling away, like really, like that's where we're going. Okay, fine. Suck it up, princess. If that's the way it is, that's the way it is, right? If that's
So you're
the
saying
nature of
that
politics,
it's not the system, that's the will of the people.
that's partly it. Yeah,
Fair
right.
enough. Fair enough. I got no evidence.
what you were talking about, if you get the current mayor of Calgary, you're trying to get, I can't even remember her name. Gondek, right? So she's not what she presented herself to be. That's nature. That's politics as well, right? We see that all the time.
Fair enough.
Right? So that's just part of the messaging. So she got elected,
Yeah.
right? There's a reverse of that situation happening in somewhere in Saskatchewan, I think. Well, it's not the mayor, it's one of the other councillors said something out loud on a, in a video, on a social media or something, was quoted as saying something, and it's been...
The gays were burning in a lake of fire.
It's being declared. No, it's funnily enough, the coverage I've seen hasn't even mentioned what she said.
That she said something.
That she said something that the rest of council has decided was, and she was, what I did manage to get from it was she was pushing to get back against the woke, right? And to me, again, that's not necessarily suspect, right? So they've barred her from showing up, right? She can't receive funding. She can't vote. She's essentially PNG,
right,
in the position she's elected to, right? So that is the reverse of the situation you're talking about,
right,
in terms of who's doing it and why,
right,
right? Well, the why is the same. Well, I don't like this person,
right.
Fundamentally, what comes down to,
Or I'm not getting what I thought I was getting.
right? And the fourth thing is, like, if we're talking about, okay, I guess maybe we're not talking about someone not being what they presented themselves as, but all we have to do is look back to 2016, and ever since there, south of the border, and all the hoo-ha that's gone with that, which brings us back to our hypocrisy conversation, which is, if someone is undesirable, unfit for office, the things that they're doing and saying is unpalatable, and there should be recourse to something for it, right?
I don't think it's the same thing, though. Because you knew what you were getting with Trump. You didn't know what you were getting with
And
Trump.
yet, when something came up that is arguably something that's cause for impeachment, right? The system failed. Right?
How did it fail?
Well,
I mean, they weren't able to remove him from office. Well, hang on. What does impeachment? I always thought impeachment meant you remove them from office.
Yeah.
it does.
But what I'm finding out ever since I first really heard the word impeachment used was in reference to Nixon, and he resigned before he could be impeached.
Yes.
And then they started talking about it with Ken Starr and the special prosecutor with the Clinton era. And then you hear it again with Trump.
So, well, the thing is, impeachment has stages.
Right.
So, in the American system, the House will impeach you.
But then the Senate
But then what that leads to is the Senate then has to have a trial.
They have a trial. Yeah.
Right? So Clinton was impeached in the House.
By the House.
There was a trial. He was
exonerated by the Senate.
He was exonerated by the Senate.
Okay.
Now, it's not necessarily a guilty, not guilty verdict. It's the Senate has a trial, then the Senate votes whether to ratify the impeachment.
Okay. And
then
so
if
the
the
Senate
Senate-
did not ratify.
Right, and the Senate never has.
Okay, so what happened with Trump?
Well, with Trump, he was impeached once,
By the House.
but actually, no, he was impeached twice by the House, I guess.
Okay.
But
I think it was a couple of times.
Yeah, no, it was twice because it was one for January 6th and one for the Ukraine. Once for the Ukraine thing.
Ukraine
In
phone
reverse
call.
order.
Yeah.
Okay.
In reverse. The Ukraine was first, and then January 6th was second.
Yeah. Did the Senate ratify?
The Senate didn't ratify either.
It didn't
because
ratify either. It had to be 60 votes. It came closer on the second one, but still not quite enough. I think Collins and...
it could have had Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House at the time structured or worded the impeachment differently.
It might have passed.
It might have passed, and they might have ratified.
Well, I would say to you then that the system functioned as it should.
And I think Pelosi did it deliberately because I think she wanted to hang because if the impeachment was ratified by the Senate, Trump could never run again. He's no longer this albatross around the neck of the Republican Party,
right?
And she saw a political advantage in that going forward.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, turns out it was a miscalculation.
Probably.
Time, At the time, I can understand that rationale.
Anyways, my point is you're right that I think your response, your arguing is that the system worked functionally the way it's designed to, i.e., X amount of votes here, Y amounts of votes there, yay or nay, it happens. Right?
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, coming back to your point, your original question was about the mayor of Calgary and someone who's been deemed undesirable in the eyes of some of her constituents,
but mainly
right?
by misrepresentation. That she disguised who she really was. That she's doing things that she did not run on.
Fair point, but now we're talking about, are we talking about opinion or are we talking about fact? What rules are we putting in place to streamline and define how someone can be removed? Because I've brought up all these other examples.
And this is the proposition that the rules we put in place is that candidates now must pick a party or a slate. And then that way we get an idea of who they are that is unspoken.
Geez, I don't know. Because I've always felt, for a long time, I've felt that actually I'd like to go the other way federally and provincially in the parliamentary system. That I think that the nation would benefit from a whole ton of independents, right? Who become the balance of power.
Actually really independent?
Well, but that's just it. It becomes like what we were saying earlier about, say,
Like the independent senators we have?
about the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. Just like our independent senators. Yes.
No,
How
but
independent are they?
Like I said, in the U.S.,
Yeah.
right? The fact that a Texas Democrat will vote
And some
harder
issues
right
will vote
on
with
some
the Republicans.
issues.
Yeah.
versus a New York
Yeah.
Democrat, New York Republican,
Yeah.
right? So,
But the U.S. system now is not currently tolerant of independence.
No.
Right.
It tries to channel you.
Yep.
no,
into-
as it is now,
Yeah.
because
Tries to channel you
partisanship,
into Republic or Democrat.
because of the days we live in.
Well, and also because the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, is controlled by the two parties, which is
How much time we got left, kids? Because I really need to say something about BC. I really want to get
Actually,
this
for
off you
once,
guys.
I have a shit ton of time. I don't have to leave for another hour.
There was an article the other day how BC has lost something like 68,700 odd people in 2023.
That was careless of them.
Yes, they. Where are these people?
Did they check their pockets?
They left them at the mall.
Did they looked under the couch?
They gained about 175,000. Well, that's through immigration. Internal net migration has been a net loss of approximately 69,000 people.
right.
Have decided to leave. There's been more people who left BC than decided to go into it. And this is kind of a first. And so they interviewed this woman who is moving to Calgary. And she was saying that, they asked, well, why are you moving? And she said, well, you know, their fall into poverty happened literally like within a week. They were what they considered staunch middle class. Then all of a sudden, their standard of living dropped, and okay, we got to leave. And they're moving to Calgary. And so as the interview progresses, she says, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And then she says, I know the politics, I know, but that's where I'm going. And I thought, oh my God, no, stay the fuck in Vancouver and Victoria, you morons.
Yeah.
BC is screwed up because of the people in Victoria and Vancouver. We should put a big fence around it and not let them out, because now they're going to spread their kids. They've ruined their homes.
Well, no,
Oh, it said the majority of these people, these refugees, are now coming to Alberta.
Yeah.
They've ruined their homes. Now they're going to ruin ours.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well,
So-
I mean, we're in the same we're in the same space now
because Texas and Florida with morons from California
exactly
and New Jersey
So
So
because
this
Alberta is the largest net
gain
in
of
immigration.
idiots. As BC's still got lots of idiots.
Oh, yeah.
Just all their poor idiots are leaving now.
It's their leading export.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, and other categories, was the right's dedication to freedom of expression and opinion at play.
Stay where you are. Keep
We
your
do-
dumb ideas where they belong.
We are
Don't bring them with you.
We are all about individual rights and freedoms to a point.
But
No.
the right of your fist ends at my face.
Yeah, no.
I'm not saying that these guys can't be stupid progressives. I'm saying be stupid progressive somewhere else.
in
No,
stupid
no.
progressive land.
Yeah, live in stupid progressive land.
Stupid progression is allowed wherever. That
No, it
is
is.
a tenet of libertarianism and everything that you've been saying up to this point.
Unfortunately,
But
you are right.
No, you're absolutely right
welcome
on
here.
that. But it's just you see this like you.
It's so frustrating.
the problem with the problem with BC is the BC electorate.
Yes.
So-
yes, 100%.
When you're in a place that's not so screwed up and you see the BC electorate
Yeah.
leaving the place that they screwed up
Yeah.
and coming here, despite the fact that there's
Yeah.
no moral
yeah.
reason to stop them in our moral framework, you're just like, oh man, this is not going to go
The
well.
frustrating thing is this inability
To recognize.
to recognize that it was their political philosophy which took what were beautiful cities
Yes.
in Victoria and Vancouver and made them utterly unlivable,
Mm-hmm.
made them cauldrons of human misery. And it's that inability to recognize that, hey, you know what, maybe those ideas weren't good.
Yeah.
And so they bring those ideas with them. And now all they're going to do is spread that misery. And it's not like we don't have enough bad ideas in Edmonton and Calgary on our own.
There's this. Oh, exactly.
Like, we got plenty of bad ideas.
There's
We
a-
don't need a help.
There's this.
Everyone hear my eyes rolling here?
There's a great
Like marbles in a
Here
jar.
we go.
There's a great Instagram account that I follow, and I can't remember the name of the account, but I could find it. But she introduces herself. She's a comedian. She does these bits, and she's a migrant from California too.
Yeah.
She moved to I think Tennessee or one of the Carolinas. But she always starts every post with, "Hi, my name's Carolyn, and I'm a recovering Californian."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And she talks about how people are carrying guns or how you can go
Yeah.
to the grocery store without being harassed by homeless people.
By
or,
panhandlers.
or
yeah.
something like that or whatever, right? And it's just, and she does things. So yeah, if people were like, "Hi, I'm John from
Yeah.
Victoria, and I'm a recovering Victorian,
Yeah.
or I'm a
Yeah.
recovering Vancouverite,"
Yeah.
or,
I've left Vancouver and I renounce the policies that I thought were a great idea 10,
Yeah.
15 years ago.
Yeah.
But now, having seen them in practice, I recognize that they are completely counter to the ideals that I had in my, at the time, but they don't do that.
yeah.
I think, and I know I've teased you about. I've pushed back against this for the
of
reasons I
course.
have,
Yeah,
right?
of
Because,
course.
but I
And
agree
again,
with you.
Seriously speaking, I cannot blame anyone for wanting to leave Victoria and Vancouver.
Well, the problem,
can't.
and I do have a problem with this because we saw this. I've mentioned this before, and the Fort McMurray fires, right? You're like,
When the left was like, serves them right.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
of the vitriol, yeah.
so coming out of BC, they're
Yeah.
a fucking pickup truck.
And again,
because every single Albertan,
we should specify it wasn't coming out of Prince George, wasn't
No.
coming out of Fort St. John, wasn't coming out of 100 Mile House
Or Kamloops even.
or Kamloops.
Yeah.
It's coming
No,
out
not
of
even
it's
Kamloops.
coming out of
Vancouver.
double V, Victoria,
Yeah.
Vancouver.
So yeah, I've got a bit of a problem with it. I think I'm not so worried about it as you because
In fact, you're saying like, yeah, now we got help.
no,
No, the problem.
I'm not saying that because I actually have a problem with these people, right? Because if that's what that woman is saying, oh, the politics, right?
Yeah.
I've said that, and I said that especially in my teens and
we
early
will note
20s.
that you never moved to Vancouver.
Yes, that's right.
What are you doing here?
He tried. It was just too damn expensive.
Yeah.
I actually came from Ottawa, but that was my dad's doing.
Okay. Drag, kicking and screaming.
And I have
Yeah.
actually lived in Vancouver for 2 brief stints since then.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's
okay, I want to talk about next.
okay.
So
Summer,
you finish yours.
summer of '87, I spent down there and came home.
Yep.
Home.
Home.
And then
Like back to Alberta. Yeah.
summer through early December in '93, and that one was like, it was on my birthday. I was standing in the rain, early December, fucking sleet coming down. I hadn't seen the sun in 2 months. I was chilled to the bone.
Yeah.
And I thought, fuck this.
Oh, so it was weather that second
Oh,
time.
yeah. That second time, it was just like, okay, it's cold in Alberta.
But at least it's
But
dry.
but it's dry. It's home. It's like fuck that. I'm coming. And I think I've told you guys this as well, right? Because I used to say that about the politics here, right? I loved being a Canadian. I loved being an Edmontonian because Edmonton at the time was like it had that small town feel to it, but the cosmopolitan nature of a big city, right? But I had a problem with Albertan politics for a while, right?
And it's like in the Klein era.
No, I came here. We moved here in '79.
Oh, okay, so we're talking Lougheed era. Lougheed Getty. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we're the Eastern Bums.
Right.
And I think I've told you, after I finished my basic in '98, right after basic, I flew out to Ontario to see my son,
Right.
who was living there with his mother. And I had to fix my flight. And I was standing in line to fix my flight because there was a strike at Air Canada or something. So they actually proactively got hold of me and said, you got to take care of your flight. Now, this is late 90s, so not a lot of internet and cell phones and stuff at the time. And showing up at Pearson Airport, standing in line, and 7 wickets, 11 lines. Like, the math was just so fucked.
Yeah.
Right? And just standing in those lines and watching the behavior of the people. Right? And who it was? It was a fucking free-for-all.
Like people in, like Ontarians.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? They were all, I mean, maybe they weren't all Ontarians, but
Okay.
you got to figure a
majority of
significant
them,
proportion of
if
them
not
were,
Torontonians,
right?
yeah.
And I was just watching the behavior of the first person, and as soon as one of the 7 wickets came open, right, it was just like fucking free for all, right? And I realized in my head, I thought, you know what? If this was in Edmonton, Calgary, anywhere in Alberta, everyone at the front of those lines would have been keeping track of who was next.
Right.
Right? And only that person
Treating it like a four-way stop.
Only that person would have been moving forward. And I thought, oh, fuck me, I'm an Albertan. I'm getting emotional saying this.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's where I'm at with that. So I think, returning to your point, these people, quote unquote, coming here.
So when did you become such a racist, though? You ignorant, transphobic, cowboy.
I'm none of those things.
Wow, you're from you're an Albertan now.
Well, that's the whole point. But
Jump
this is
on in. The water's fine.
and that's
We have cookies.
Time for you to take your slander with the rest of us.
I push back against that slander. I got a big problem with it, right? Because
Anyway, facetiousness
funnily
aside.
enough, you're sitting here saying there are guys like Trent who already think like have silly thoughts that we are intolerant of. We don't need new people coming here. But here's the thing. Even in Alberta, even the left in Alberta is different from the left in BC.
This is true.
And I think we saw that under Notley, right? That there are enough things that she did, I believe, that were in Alberta's interests over the federal and over BC in particular.
Schism. There was certainly a schism.
So
Alberta
I'm
NDP
not worried
and
about
federal
these quote unquote foreigners coming from the Lower Mainland and
I'd rather have foreigners than people from Vancouver, to be brutally honest.
That's another question. So of that net loss for British Columbia, how much of that emigration is to the rest of Canada? How much is that return to the old country? Because there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of immigrants to Canada who are looking at Canada and going...
It didn't say. It was that 68,000 was purely within Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a significant issue we're seeing now, where emigration is happening in Canada, which is something we're not used to. Yeah, immigrants come here for 2-3 years, change their mind, go somewhere else.
And they bail.
Yeah,
30% of immigrants coming to the country right now are bailing within the first couple of years.
It didn't specify. They just talked about internal migration, and they didn't give hard numbers. They just said the majority of them were just popping over to Alberta.
Well, we know that from across the
I think
nation.
there's been a significant in-migration into Alberta from Ontario as well.
Yeah, the rest of Canada,
From the
period,
GTA. But
Alberta primarily, and then Saskatchewan is number 2.
Yeah.
What we should do... Oh, yeah.
Big fence.
What we should do... Yeah,
Build a wall.
No.
I agree with you.
Build a wall.
I'm going to agree with you on...
Surrey will be the border, and just like wall off Victoria and Vancouver.
In the meantime, there should be a person with a banjo standing on, when the flights come in from Vancouver and Toronto or at the border.
Yeah.
Here's the banjo. Play me something. A little dueling banjos. If you can do it, you're in.
Yeah, if you can't play banjo, you're out. Or if you can't name at least 3 country music songs.
I'm going to agree with you on one point. I think we should build the walls around Edmonton and Calgary, so all these people coming in with their progressive views
Can just go there.
No,
You're saying contain the contagion. Keep talking. I'm with you.
no, you're gonna love this. So they have,
He's like to make sure the
they
contagion
have,
spreads.
so they have to end up in Wood Buffalo, White Court, Fox Creek, Medicine Hat.
Why? Why do you hate those people? Fox
Because
Creek's a nice town.
That's how I take over
Been to Fox
Alberta.
Creek?
I've been to Fox Creek. I've been to White Court. I don't have. I mean,
Of the two, I'd take White Court in a heartbeat. But anyway,
I'm just saying.
Like, what do you have against them that you would foist like Vancouverites on them? That's not nice, Trent.
I'm feeding your nightmare.
It is nightmare fuel.
That's how
you know where they should go. Grimshaw.
Just
The town that sounds like it.
because they need some homeless encampments too.
Yeah.
They need more property crime in Grimshaw.
I think
They
actually
have plenty
They need
already.
more. They need more fentanyl addiction in Grimshaw.
I think that the failure of BC and the Lower Mainland has been, as we've discussed many times in many ways, what's coming from the left at the moment, in particular, is this blind ideology with no pragmatism behind it.
Yeah.
You know.
It's because
Yes.
again, this is where their policies have been showcased. They've been the champion.
Yeah.
The number one thing that comes to mind when you're talking about BC is safe supply.
Yeah.
And they have been the champion of it for decades, 3 decades now.
And the numbers are still going up.
Oh yeah. So I think it's safe to say that the data, like if I can be very restrained in my commentary, the data simply does not support the supposition that safe supply saves lives.
Yeah, I mean, as a, the libertarian thing is decriminalization of drugs completely, right? And it's hard as a libertarian to watch the situation in BC and going on, well, this is and think that this is still a good idea.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that libertarians would say that, look, hey, there's other things they're doing in BC that are not, they're picking and choosing from the policy, from the harm reduction, the grand scheme of harm reduction. And yeah, I don't know.
And the addictive nature of narcotics.
So this
skews the model a little bit, right?
So let me ask
Well,
you
and
a question.
it's created warped. The safe supply system has created warped incentive structures for addicts that maybe wouldn't in. So in a place where you decriminalize narcotics, but you don't supply them to addicts.
Okay.
The incentive structure is different,
Very
and
different.
probably the results are different,
Yeah.
right? Like so,
yeah,
people point to Portugal as a good model.
Yeah, but they're dismantling that model now.
Yeah, I don't know, but Portugal was never legal. Like you wouldn't be charged for drug possession. Mm-hmm. But if you were intoxicated or in the throes of addiction, you would still get mandatory counseling.
Yeah, mandatory treatment kind of.
And I think that's and actually the what Daniel Smith is trying to do is kind of more towards that kind of model.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the questions, the points. Okay, quickly, how do you feel about mandatory counseling?
To be honest, people who are in the throes of drug addiction aren't able to function as independent citizens, individual citizens, right? Like Like
so they don't have rights.
They do.
Look, you have to be able
to, but they don't have the same agency.
Yeah,
they're impaired.
You have to be able, like, if you have rights, you also have responsibilities, and if you cannot live up to the responsibilities, see, everybody talks about rights and nobody talks about responsibilities.
Okay,
all the time.
I agree with
if
you.
you can't fulfill your responsibilities of citizenship, then you.
Or
have
it's like somebody who's in a coma.
Yeah,
right.
They still have rights, but they are not in a position where they can advocate for themselves, where they can effectively advocate and communicate with us as to what they need
and make decisions.
Okay.
So a person like in the throes of a hardcore drug addiction where they will debase themselves utterly to get more drugs. I mean, when we put them in counseling, it's because we want to act in their best interests, even if they can't act in their own best interests.
So this is an exception to some libertarian ideology that tends to get expressed here.
I could say
A necessary one. A necessary
Look,
impregnement.
Like a necessary compromise.
I think even libertarians have to argue it. Like if you can't act in your own
interest,
if you're in your own interests.
But who's defining that? See, I'm throwing your guys' ammunition back at you here.
No,
right?
Sure.
Or if you cannot clearly, again, it's like the guy in a coma. That
See,
guy
somebody's
cannot
advocate.
advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
This, I feel, is the fine line we've always been walking. Anytime that you're able to parrot my staff back at me or I'm at you, that is where we meet, right? So, and I agree. And I'm just, right now, I'm yanking your chain a bit because, as I said, we've got ideological concepts that need pragmatic solutions.
But it's good though. It's good what you're doing. This is where truth is discovered. Like on our end, if you're not throwing darts and if you're not picking away at the chinks, how are we going to improve our clarity? What you're doing right now makes us stronger.
Well, yeah, and to the point of libertarianism is, and it doesn't get talked about enough within libertarian. Like libertarians spend too much time talking, and there's good reason, talking about the overbearance of government and stuff like that, and how it's too much in our lives, and they don't talk about enough about like if you remove the government from aspects of your life, then you have to take responsibility for those aspects of your life.
You're right.
Right. So if you want less intrusive police forces and policing, then you have to advocate or act in your own defense, say self-defense, right? Yeah. So maybe that means you need, if crime is bad enough, you need to conceal carry because you can't, because you have to protect yourself because there's not enough cops around right. If you diminish the size of the social safety net, then the citizenry has a responsibility to pick up the slack.
Responsibility to pick up that slack.
Whether it's financially donating to charities or active
volunteering or doing whatever.
Right.
That's right. So, and if they're not prepared to do that, then government's got to pick up that slack.
Right.
So point taken.
Right. So if you are in the throes of a drug addiction that you cannot advocate for yourself, you cannot act
in your own interest.
In your own interests. Then maybe you're going into a mandatory drug rehab system or program.
Yeah.
Right. And also, what is a libertarian? Because there's about a billion different views of it. So, right. Like I also, and this is a very
I think that comes with the territory.
There's I've talked about my a little bit my dream of a mandatory national service for all people, where you spend the first 2 years learning to be a guerrilla. Basically because we can't mass a sizable military force to actually defend the country. So if the Canadian Armed Forces is for defending the country, then you need a system where
like a home guard.
You need a home guard system, right?
You need a Red Dawn system.
So, but that is a very unlibertarian view. That's not libertarian.
Compulsory military service is not not going to fly with the libertarians.
No. So
coming back to something you said earlier. You said
a wall.
Actually, I think it was between the two. One of you stated, "Okay, it's not saving more lives, right? It's
safe supply.
Safe supply is not resulting in more lives saved.
Yeah,
right.
No, because the biggest thing is that the people are taking their safe supply and they're selling it to drug dealers and trading it for.
Yeah, there's a variety of unintended consequences.
Right. So, a couple of points. Rewinding a bit to something you said, Steve, about how you legitimize it or you de-illegalize it. What's the word I'm looking for? Decriminalize the possession and the use, but you don't provide the supply. But now you're just, I think one of the pragmatisms that needs to be dealt with here is now you're just allowing for the illicit supply.
Yeah.
So that's still criminal activity and that's violent and that's also shit going on. So that needs to be factored. And I'm not looking to open the discussion on that.
Isn't that what we did before? Wasn't that the model of the past?
Well, because the prohibition.
Oh no, we didn't decriminalize it. Right. Yeah. Okay. Go
on. And sorry, I just kind of pointing that out there, and I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole because I know we do this, right? But from there, when the more people dying, actually, as opposed to fewer people dying as a result of this, you, Patty, brought up the addiction concept, right? So, I think it's a line from the English Patient. Yeah, more people died, but which people? Just different, just different people dying, right? So my question, and this brings us into capitalism, right? From what I've seen and read and understand, that the opioid addiction is the big problem right now, and it involves people that we can no longer write off the way we used to write off drug addicts. We've got a lot of middle class people out there, kids, professionals, who got addicted to this because it was prescribed by doctors and pushed by big pharma, right? And so that's irresponsible capitalism. And this is one that you guys have talked about how capitalism regulates itself and business regulates itself. And no, this is business going out of its way to create an addiction to its product, to market itself. It's unethical, it's immoral, and I would argue it's fucking evil.
Is that actually transferable to Vancouver? Because we don't have that same pharmaceutical system that caused the opioid addiction in the southeastern United States.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Our healthcare system does not work the same way with prescription drugs.
I'm not talking about the supply. I'm talking about the addiction. Just the fact that it exists.
Yeah, like you were saying, it started by pharmaceutical, like the opioid crisis. But I think that's regional to Appalachia.
There was a movement, and it was, I think it was Purdue kind of that put it, because there's been a couple, like a docudrama. Peter Berg just did a series that's on Netflix about.
Yeah,
I think Purdue. That might be the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Purdue and how their funneling of Oxycontin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and so there was. I remember late 80s, early 90s. I kind of specifically remember like a 60 Minutes piece, and they tried to fundamentally change the way, because prior to that point, it was like, there wasn't a lot of opioid prescription, and doctors generally viewed that it was better if patients, if they had to exist in some pain, that was okay. And so then they tried, and Purdue did a real big public relations campaign, probably with some other people, some other pharmaceutical companies, to say, no, we need to completely reimagine the way we do, like, people shouldn't have to live with pain. We need to completely reimagine the way we do pain management.
Right. And
they probably even invented the term pain management. And so that kind of created and I don't think that the Canadian health care system was immune to that, to that movement, like, because it was,
fair.
They changed the narrative, as it were, about pain management,
fair.
right?
But
so I think even the Canadian system was more likely to prescribe
it's
opioids
not
and
fundamental to what we were talking about, though, because any way you slice it, again, we could try proving the negative and say, well, maybe safe supply prevented more deaths.
No.
But irrelevant. Any way you slice it, safe supply was a philosophy that did not solve the problem. And that's fundamental to the migration of people out of these communities. In the same way that Vancouver and Victoria's approach to homelessness did not solve the problem. Their approach to taxation did not solve the problem. Their approach to housing management and immigration did not solve the problem.
Well, I mean, everything that you just mentioned there, you're absolutely right, is an issue unto itself.
Right. And the issue, the bigger issue, is that these policies, as they were applied in those two cities, failed. Mm-hmm. But they're still being embraced as viable by the people who flee the results of those policies.
Well, it's oh man.
And this to me is what's more worrisome, in that people who have suffered the direct consequences of bad ideas are still holding those bad ideas.
Yeah. Again, it's that lack of pragmatism. I wasn't attempting to directly connect those two dots. I was going, okay, I'd be interested to find out if those numbers, because I know the numbers have gone up. Right?
Numbers of
deaths.
Okay.
In BC. Now, how do they break out between, is it, just the ongoing epidemic of addiction and how we got there? But that's a separate conversation on its own.
Right.
But it might be relevant to the conversation we're having. Numbers are going up. How many of those are directly
saying
related?
That safe supply is viable?
I'm asking if those numbers are pure, right? What's the purity of those numbers? Are they all?
So in other words, you still want to leave the door open for safe supply as a public policy?
No, okay. I'm saying I'm questioning. I'm just asking the question. Of that increase in numbers, is it all due to safe supply? That's all. That's all I'm asking. And I'm not saying yea or nay. I'm not saying it vindicates safe supply.
This is interesting as hell. Steve's pulling something up on the monitor. That's what I'm talking about.
So many things you talked about, like housing crisis we've already discussed. Yep. Homeless crisis. Yep. Okay, so I think I got two things. I'm holding up two fingers.
Dude, you need a notebook.
I'm not showing you the back of them.
You need a notebook.
Well, man. Homelessness. I'm seeing. It's always going to be Victoria in particular and Vancouver. Well, for their own reasons, both of them. It's going to be in the nature of them to receive indigent population
because of the climate.
Because of the climate.
Yeah, you're less likely to freeze to death.
So, any solution they've come up with is just going to. It's going to do nothing to discourage that, right? It's going to keep more people are going to go.
No. You could walk through Stanley Park in 1975. You can't now.
You could walk through Stanley Park in the 80s too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. In the past, before these ideas took hold, Vancouver had public spaces. It had the Lower Mainland had public parks. It doesn't now. Those are no-go areas. Unless you're armed.
Well, that's a separate conversation altogether.
And I mean visibly armed, like you're like a tough dude with like a baseball bat with a spike through the end of it, and you got some hard-looking buddies with you, right? Like unless you're like projecting that kind of deterrence. If you're just a family of four, want to take your toddlers, to the playground and take your dog for a walk. Vast areas of public spaces in the Lower Mainland and Victoria are now no-go zones for you.
Yeah, interesting.
And it was not that way in the past.
Well, it depends on how far back in the past. I know that when I was living in the Lower Mainland in 93, my favorite watering hole was in Gastown. But to get there, I had to take the bus, and that was on Hastings.
Yeah.
So I walked, my most direct route took me right past Pigeon Corner. And all the attics there, right? And they never fucked with me. But I realized that's because I was 6 foot tall with a shaved head and, might have looked imposing because I didn't look worried. But that was only because I was too naive to be worried.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You didn't look like an easy mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was going to say it's become intrinsic within that ideological thinking that we don't want the homeless to starve. We don't want them to have to sleep on the street. We don't. We
never did. We never did.
Exactly. So we need to find a solution.
Management has changed, and I think it's safe to say that the Vancouver model of homeless management, same thing with the Los Angeles model of homeless management, is an unmitigated failure.
So that's just it. There's
unmitigated.
There's the ideal, and then there's the
execution.
The execution of it. So okay, back to the drawing board.
Still have the ideal. But they still cling to that model of execution.
Yeah, and it's again, it's these days this inability to admit failure.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, because you need to be able to budget for this stuff. It's like, okay, we only got X amount of money, right? This is the reason you're all leaving is because this, you're paying taxes and getting nothing out of it. Yep. So,
and this is where I think, like the phrase, the political has become the personal. We've emotionally invested with whatever hill we're looking towards. And so even if I, deep down in my heart of hearts, realize that maybe our approach to homeless management on the Western Hill has been a failure, I still can't bear to accept that the guys headed towards the east maybe have a better idea. Or that maybe my idea isn't good. I'm not willing to take one step to the east on this. So I think that's part of our problem.
Well, I think
we emotionally identify with our positions. Even when presented with contrary evidence, we're extremely reluctant to revise our positions.
Well, again, that's the echo chamber system we live in nowadays. But I think it's also, a lot of it is kind of metaphorically. There's a bunch of us out here now, like our whole society, even in Canada, is fighting over the food trucks, right? If you look at so many of the stats from the past, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, the comparative rates of corporate taxation, which government was willing to impose and companies lived with.
Yeah.
Right? The comparative rates of pay for your average employee. Just basically the standard of living has been dropping. Now people are having to fight for scraps and scraps and scraps, right? So which is why I always push back against capitalism right now. I mean,
why do you think it was capitalism that did that? Because again,
I'm trying to get to my second point for a while.
Those problems are government that have done that, not capitalism. Capitalism is the only thing that kept us afloat.
All right, we'll set that conversation aside for the moment.
I guess that's a whole new episode.
Right. But actually, so where I was actually in my meandering way, wanting to get back to your point about how the hypocrisy of the right in addressing the immigration issue, right? And not being able to declare, we're going to stop this, or we're going to limit this, right?
Or drastically curtail one way or the other.
Right. So I think both in words used and in tone expressed, that message just needs to be tweaked a little bit. For someone to have the courage to go and say, without being antagonistic about it, listen, we've got a problem, right? We've got a lot going on here. Housing issue. There's all this great big ball of wax.
Yep.
All right? Here's the numbers. Here's the math.
Yeah.
Right? We are not anti-immigration. But right now we need to deal with what we got.
Right.
Right? Because we haven't kept up with it. And I'm not going to point the fingers at the Trudeau government. I'm not going to point the fingers at the Harper government that came before it, because this is a systemic problem that's taking forever. Right?
Yeah.
We need to turn down the flow for a bit, catch up, because the swimming pool is full.
Right.
Right?
Or if I was going to be really, really, really specific, immigration is not the problem. Unskilled immigration is the problem. If we were to rigidly enforce the point system, where we're saying, okay, we're looking for immigrants who, I'll just throw some arbitrary criteria out there. Already speak, are already fluent. Fluent. I'm going to say fluent. English or French. Have skills that we require. So they have, say, at the very least, a trade or post-secondary degree that we recognize on par with our own. And those folks, and you know what? I'll throw in another one. Say under the age of 30, because we want people who are going to be contributing tax-wise for the long haul. So I'll just give you those three to start. We wouldn't get anybody.
Bullshit. So
I don't think we would.
I'm going to push back cynically against that.
Yeah.
Right. So take this with a grain of salt. What I'm going to say, listeners, who's going to clean our toilets?
Oh, we can do that ourselves.
No, we can't.
We
don't.
Tell me why.
Because, and I cannot count on two hands the number of people I have personally known who have immigrated to Canada with fucking degrees.
Sure.
That you've talked to. And I'm not talking about dysfunction. I'm not talking liberal arts degrees. We're talking doctors. We're talking nurses. We're talking people who could be contributing. And this is ironic coming out of, the healthcare crisis that occurred during COVID and since, right? That have been working as taxi drivers, that have been working as maids and janitors. Right?
Now, I think
we have these people, and we are happy to have them here because they're willing to do the shit jobs, literally the shit jobs that we don't want to have to do for ourselves.
This conversation actually came up on Barry Weiss's podcast this week. They were talking about how did the working class become second-class citizens in the United States.
Right. And
that narrative is largely... so that narrative came up. You need immigrants because you need immigrants to do the grunt work that Americans didn't want to do. And the issue became that... now, the guest was Batya Ungar Sargon, who's very compelling speaker, very compelling writer, but she's kind of a Marxist.
Yeah.
And so her viewpoint was that it was actually the progressive, like the arm of the population has come to dominate the Democratic Party. So the 1%, the elites, and Rasmussen's poll, those people essentially made it so they could bring in lots of immigrants and devalue American labor, devalue American manual labor, but not devalue American intellectual labor.
Right.
In the Canadian context, those doctors are working as cab drivers because we don't have a good system for acknowledging and recognizing their credentials.
Right.
Right. We need a better system. But if you needed Canadian people to be janitors, you would find Canadian people to be janitors.
The number one reason why Canadians, or like what we say, like native born, don't want to be janitors is because wage suppression.
Yeah. Well,
and it's like we had people who did all of those jobs before the age of mass migration.
And if you go outside,
we did.
If you go outside Alberta, BC, I did a project. My last year, I think, while I was working at Trican, we did a pipeline project in Sarnia in the Chemical Valley.
Yeah.
It was actually a plant project. It didn't go well, but that's beside the point. And it was a bit of a culture shock to me to go to Tim Hortons and see white people working at Tim Hortons, because in Alberta.
Yeah, the wages were high enough. Yeah,
the wages were high enough
that you could attract
and
local people to your workforce.
Yeah, well, I think it was more the opportunity. Like, we had to import labor to work service jobs here, because the qualifications to get into a high-paying middle-class job in the energy industry were low. Right? Like, you could be a high school dropout and go make $90,000 a year working on a testing crew,
or as a deckhand or a swamper or what have you.
As a derrick hand or whatever in the energy industry. Yeah. So that created opportunities, and it created a shortage of people to work in the service industries because there was just too much opportunity for low-skilled, high-paying jobs, where that wasn't that opportunity in Ontario, right?
Right.
Like, especially where the infrastructure, because in Alberta, so much of it is construction and infrastructure building. You go to the Chemical Valley, that infrastructure has been there for 70 years. Right. Right. So it's developed. So the high-paying jobs require education. So plant operators, right? Like that's a relatively low barrier of entry course, but it's still 6 months.
Still requires
6 months minimum
education.
Training plus things. So there's much less opportunity for the locals to have those high-paying jobs because. Right. So
there's no such thing as a labor shortage. This is an economic impossibility. There is no such thing as a labor shortage. What there is a shortage of labor who will work at a given price floor.
Yeah.
So when business leaders say, oh, well, we've got a labor shortage, we need mass immigration for the labor shortage. No. What they're saying is, I want to lower the price of labor. Yeah. And that's why there's been such an attraction for unskilled labor.
Yeah, exactly.
But we are seeing that there's always a cause, or there's always an action-reaction. Yeah. There are no clear-cut solutions. There are only trade-offs. And when you mass import unskilled labor to drive down the cost of wages, our productivity plummets.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on that. Yeah. That's how many episodes have we come up with today?
So if we're going to talk about, it's not that I think immigration is itself the problem. It's unskilled immigration. And again, when we talk about people from around the world that we've brought in who have higher degrees, this is again another problem in that we have cartels around our professional networks and our education industry that say, okay, you want to come in here and be a doctor and you've got a degree from India? Fine. You have to come pay the money to our universities to get that degree.
Right.
So we have various cartels that are preventing that skilled labor from coming in.
Right. So I've been waiting a while, so I had to listen to you two clowns fucking go on and on and on. So, answering your point again, I'm not claiming that everybody, all the jobs being done at the janitorial and maid house cleaning service level are being done by people with degrees from elsewhere.
No, we didn't.
Right?
We didn't take that.
Right?
I didn't take that.
That's what I heard the response to be.
Or
What
just,
I'm saying,
or just what I always hear is, Canadians won't do those jobs. Not at $50 an hour, they won't.
So that's why I'm clarifying.
But they will do it if you stop undercutting the price of labor and simply let market forces do what they do. Those wages will have to increase because it's not optional. You have to have janitorial services.
Right.
Yeah.
And in order to make it happen, the wages will have to increase to the point where people will voluntarily do those jobs.
Right. So my answer was going to be this. Okay. There are native-born Canadians, quote unquote, that are willing to do that.
Yes.
But not native-born Canadians with nursing and doctor's degrees. All right. So
no.
that's what I'm saying.
Fair enough.
Now I think you're starting to get to where what I agree with the immigration system being broken. Right. I don't think they're not following the point system. I mean, there are, you get the side bleeding effects of, okay, now I'm going to bring over my mother and my mother-in-law and my cousin
Or
and
they
all
have
that.
too many. They have too many ways to waive the point system.
Right. But these obviously, to my mind, I mean, I can't declare this, but I'm relatively certain that someone who's got a nursing degree or a doctor's degree has gone through that points system and gotten points for those degrees.
Right.
Right. So
even though we have no intention of letting them practice
exactly.
medicine.
Right. So now we've got, it's like,
it's dishonest as hell.
Exactly. So it's completely, it's all siloing. Right. Immigration's going, okay, well, we've got our loopy ass thinking over here. We're just going to have numbers and we're going to say this is the criteria for bringing them in. Yeah. Right. Obviously, who needs to be talking is there needs to be some collaboration and coordination with, say, provincial medical organizations, nursing, right? But also an imposition on them saying, listen, you can't keep doing this, right? You're screaming at us that you need more people.
But you're rejecting the people.
But you're rejecting people who are here, right?
Yeah.
No.
Or they need to be really... Like, I know that we accept South African medical degrees, and I know that we accept British and Australian medical degrees.
Well, yeah, obviously, probably from Western Europe.
I would imagine Western Europe, but I don't know. This needs to be openly and clearly published. Like, make a list of medical schools that we will accept on par. And then make a second tier of medical schools that we will accept as... Say if you have a degree in medicine from a university in Brazil, just to pick one, then we're going to say, okay, we will rate that. We'll give you credit for 2 years of medical school with that. But we want you to complete 2 years of medical school in one of our institutions.
Exactly.
They need to really come clean with this.
Yeah.
And be very public and very open so that some guy in Brazil can simply pull up the website and see what the criteria are.
Yeah.
But of course, we're not doing that because that's not what we want. Yeah. That's really de facto what Canada, not we as in the three of us in this room, but what Canada wants is a pool of unskilled labor that will bring wages down. I mean, there were other factors too.
No,
we wanted to fuel. There was thinking in the past that we wanted to fuel the economy by creating a housing bubble. And for a longest time, this is the only thing that was keeping Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal afloat. And you could argue it's the only thing that's keeping it afloat now is that by injecting all of these people, you drove up demand for housing and anything attached to the housing industry, and it kept those economies, those economies growing. But like all bubbles,
it's got to
it's
burst
a bubble
at some point,
and it's going to burst. And we're seeing it beginning to burst right now.
Well, and I think there's a lot of opinion. So for me in particular, it's like, okay, all you rich ass clowns, billionaires who have been buying up all this property and driving the prices up.
Yep. Like,
let's hope it goes and fucks you. Now the problem is, at the same time, anyone that I actually have empathy and sympathy with, who in good faith bought a house because it's the only way they could, is about to.
They're going to be underwater.
They're going to lose themselves in the same wash, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and just to me, there was a lot of untruth about immigration. we presented it as this way of, oh, well, we're bringing in skilled labor and we're doing it on a humanitarian basis and diversity makes us better. Bullshit. It was done because we wanted an exploitable pool of slave labor. That's why. And there was a few other minor issues. Like, again, we thought, well, if we create a housing bubble, it will benefit some very particular people in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver who happen to donate a fair amount to political parties, so we'll help them a little bit. But by and large, the dominant reason was we wanted an exploitable pool of slave labor.
I find it fascinating to hear you say that, right? Because effectively, to me, that's a condemnation of capitalists, right?
And you know what? Largely it is. Or at the very least, I'm going to say externality capitalists. It's an exploitation. Corporatists. Thank you. Not capitalists. Corporatists. Yes. I stand corrected. God damn.
Well, and I agree, and it's
because it's in a violation of everything that capitalism stands for.
Yeah.
Which is the don't try and circumvent the law of supply and demand.
Yeah.
Let free voluntary exchange carry itself out. Yeah. And by skewing that process, by undercutting the legs off of one branch or one half of that transaction, in other words, the workforce.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was corporatists who used the government to completely skew the market, make it totally unfree and one-sided in their favor.
Yeah.
Well, I find it fascinating also that we agree on the productivity scale. It's funny because I actually went and revisited the 3 terms recently. One is productivity, right? So we're talking about productivity, but productivity is just numbers out, right? So your production line could throw out 100 units. You push them through.
Right.
But 40% of them might be fucked.
Right.
Right? But that's productivity.
Still
100
productivity,
units,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Efficiency is what you put into producing those 100,
Yeah.
100, right?
What is your inputs? Yeah.
You could produce those 100
Widgets.
with using 10% fewer people and over 10% less time.
energy.
Right? That's efficiency. Effectiveness is what's the quality of those things
Right.
at the other end.
Do we have 100%
Can we actually-
of our widgets functioning? And
Let's get
satisfy
100
the
of those
customer?
100.
Yeah. Or
Right?
do we have 40?
What shocks me, ongoing now, this is a plug for me and what I do in my professionals.
Yeah.
Right? What shocks me on an ongoing basis, has throughout my career,
What a shameless capitalist.
Right.
Anyway.
is how management, you're calling them corporatists, whatever, seem to think that keeping wages low, deliberately low, is the only thing they need to do to maximize their profits and their revenues. But they're not. They're not.
Yeah.
The best thing they're going to get out of that is productivity, as discussed.
Right.
And it's not going to be great.
Yep.
You're not going to get efficiencies and you're not going to get effectiveness. What you're talking about, supply and demand, having fair wage based on that interaction.
Yep.
You get engaged workforce
Yep.
that gives a shit. It's going to give you those other 2 factors you're looking for. Without them, you're not.
Yep.
Right? So...
And if I can add something to that mentality of the only costs we have to worry about is labor. That's a race to the bottom where you're competing against Mexico, you're competing against India, you're competing against Nigeria, you're competing against China. You will lose.
Yeah.
The only hope that businesses in Canada have,
Listen up, folks,
is to compete with the high skill labor industry. The high tech. I mean, there's a reason why you cannot build electron microscopes in India. There's a reason. Because you don't have the workforce and the infrastructure to do that. You don't have the lowest paid guy making the electron microscope is still a very skilled employee. So that's where we need to compete, is in the manufacture of high-tech, high-value, high-quality goods, which require a highly skilled workforce. And if you're going to attract that, you need a well-compensated workforce.
I'll go even further. You get an engaged workforce, right? You can do this in any industry.
Yeah.
You get an engaged workforce, and I've seen it, I've done it. It comes out of what we learned as soldiers, coming out of basic training, right? the individual self-leadership and the teamwork
Yeah.
principles involved, right? And I've applied it all the way up the chain of command as I've risen. I'm going to go even further than what you're saying, right? Pay them a fair wage, yes, right? But I guarantee you, no matter what business it is that you're in, that you can take your people, you can give them a 4-day work week, pay them the same that you're paying them now. For 40 hours, you can pay them for 32 hours.
10 hours a day.
You're
Or
giving
you
them
can do
what?
410s.
Yep, 410s.
No, I'm saying.
saying 4
I'm
eights.
saying 4 8s.
Yeah.
And
Pay-
just jump them
and pay them
2 hours
and-
production a day.
Right? So you're giving them a 20% raise,
Yeah.
right? And you are going to come out ahead of the game. You're going to have better profits, better revenues, because you're going to have better effectiveness at the end of it. Guaranteed.
Well, I can't say you're wrong because I've never seen it done.
I can tell, and I was astounded.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize at the time. I ran a small rail yard, and they used to
Yeah.
give me monthly sheets.
Yeah.
There's one of the few companies that had the transparency to send me. Here's
Yeah.
your operational budget every month.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I looked at it, and right, I had an ops ratio that was half again as good as anyone else's,
Yeah.
and half again as good as what you can expect
Yeah.
for an industry standard. Right? I didn't even know what that meant at the time. Right? And I did that by keeping
Ops
it
ratio.
an operational ratio. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like your cost of goods sold measured against,
Okay.
you know.
So it was a
against
measure
your
of
output.
your profit and
what
product.
you had to spend to get it done. It's like a cost of
Okay.
goods sold plus some other things.
Okay.
Right?
So it was a measure of your productivity and
Yeah.
efficiency.
Right? Now, here's my ignorance because, you know, I came up through the ranks. So I don't know all the terms,
Yeah.
right? So my number has always been, I thought my ops ratio was 30% versus everyone else's 20. Apparently it's the other way around. I was achieving 70% when everyone else's was 80. And that's about what most companies reasonably expect.
80.
That's why I'm saying half again is good.
Oh,
Right.
okay. Yeah, gotcha.
You know, that's what I was achieving. I didn't even realize at the time that I was achieving it. Right. That's 50% better than my peer organizations.
Why? How did you achieve it?
I ran a lean team. They were self-starters.
So it's more
I fostered, you know, working within the systems, having the initiative to make decisions for themselves, but ask the right questions at the right time, right? And they were able to juggle their workload. They could self-define it,
right.
and they would just get it done, and they would get it done well, right?
The heck is that? So anyway, we'll cover it for you. I mean, I'm a big believer in 410s,
Okay.
where everyone gets a 3-day weekend. I've never seen that go south. I guess there's somebody with a bottle. There was a knock at the door outside, folks, and we think it's somebody looking at a hockey team looking for a bottle drive. Anyway, I've never seen that go wrong. You know what? I would like to see someone say, okay, let's do 4 8s.
People are doing it.
Let's do 4 8s. Salary your people, right? So let's say your people were making 65 grand a year, just for a planning number, right? 65 grand a year, and they were working a 40-hour week.
Yep.
Bump them to a 32.
Yep.
Still 65,000.
That's what I'm saying.
And let's see what you get.
There are examples out there.
I would
There
say,
are-
okay, yeah, let's see what happens.
I've heard of a good half dozen
Yep.
over the last 2-3 years.
Yep.
Where I can't cite them right now.
Yeah.
But the examples are out there. How people are trying it.
Yep.
People love it.
Yeah.
And it's being encouraged all around.
You'd get less churn. Because people would realize, I got a pretty good go here.
Yeah.
And they're not going to want to leave it. If I had a business that was very healthy and I could afford that within my current margins, like if I was barely making even, then that's a gamble I wouldn't take. Right? Like 20% jump in my labor costs is going to say put me in the red. I probably wouldn't do it. Oh, I guarantee you I wouldn't do it. But if I was already, like if I could comfortably afford it, and you're saying me that this will boost your profit, then I'd probably try it. Say, yeah, let's give it a shot. And I'd say that to my employees. I'm willing to try this for, say, the next, for half the fiscal year, for 2 quarters. Let's see how it goes.
Or what you can do,
Let's see
again,
what we do.
because all change isn't about the change. Change is the end game. It's the transition. How do you get there? Right? Go to your employees and say, this is where I want to end up.
Yeah.
Right? We can't afford that right now.
Yeah.
Right?
But if we start hitting these numbers.
Let's go to 38 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right? So half an hour, finish
Okay.
half an hour earlier every day.
Yeah.
Right?
We jump you the other 30 minutes.
Keep the pace, the pay the same. We're going to try that for a month.
Yeah. And see what we do for our numbers.
And we're going to do that every month. Let's say
Okay.
everything
so
else
you're saying gradually.
everything else stays the same.
Yeah.
All right. You show me that, I'm willing to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you for a month.
Yeah.
Right? You give me as good or better.
And we'll stay.
Right?
Yeah.
We'll bring it down another half hour next month.
So if I put out 400 widgets right now, you're working 40-hour weeks. I'm paying you 40-hour, or I'm paying you 65 grand a year for a 40-hour week. I get 400 widgets.
Yeah.
I am willing to jump you guys half an hour every day.
Yep.
But you keep me
at 400.
no lower than 400 widgets
That's right.
at my current levels of productivity,
Yep.
efficiency, effectiveness.
Yep.
I get no less than 400 effective widgets at
Yep.
my current costs. And we're going to keep doing this. If it works out next month, I'm going to jump you an hour. You're still making 65 grand a year.
Yep.
But you keep me at that magic 400, and we'll keep doing this.
Yep.
We'll keep going until we find out what the minimum line is.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd do that. Yeah, how can you lose? You can't.
I'm willing to almost guarantee that you're going to at least remain as good.
Yep.
And if not immediately, eventually, over
get a
time,
jump.
it's going to get better and better and better and better. You're going to get better productivity, efficiency, and
Well, I
effectiveness
think
out
you'd
of
get
it.
to a certain point, then it would stop. Because, no, I think it would sink back down to 400. Because guys would know, because they're monitoring the metrics just like you are, right? Because they have no incentive to bump up production to 500. 450.
I disagree. I disagree,
have
and
an
this is
incentive.
why. And this is the difference between leadership and management. This is what engagement is all about.
Okay.
Right? And this is what companies and employees need to realize out there. What's going on right now when we keep this productivity in mind. On the one hand, it's organizations who fail to grasp what they're up against right now.
Yeah.
Right? They're competing for labor. Right? What employees need to recognize is they're not that great compared to previous generations. So companies are in this unfortunate position of having to compete for shit labor.
Right.
Right? The only solution to that is not only to be able to compete and win and get that labor, but to turn them into something. Right?
Okay.
Now, and this is what engagement means. It's that self-leadership. It's that empowerment.
Right.
Right? Which one of the three of us around this table was an Army reservist for the money?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. That's all you have to tap into. If you get people to understand, because if you get to that magical 32 hours a week, 4 8s, you get a 3-day weekend every week. Everyone else is getting 3-day weekends, you're getting 4. Easter?
Yeah. Yeah. we know
Well,
what you mean.
we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. You're getting better than anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got a 3-day weekend.
Yeah.
Or you got 4-day weekend.
Yeah.
Followed by a 3-day week or a 3-day week leading into
yeah.
you know what I mean?
Like
It's
a
just
32-hour work week for the same amount of money that everybody else has to kick in 40 hours for.
right.
Yeah.
So that in itself, because I had a client and he was like, I artificially set my targets for my people 15% high just so I'll get 5% more out of them. Right. I'm like, dude, yeah, you're going to burn your people out.
And then they leave.
Right.
And now you got turnover, which is costing you money.
Yes.
Oh, it's and try to wrap their noodle around that, right?
Yeah.
How much that's costing, them, right? And I'm trying to say, listen, how about we create people who are going to put 10% extra on their own? Expect that out of themselves. They are going to look at what they do And because they are who they are, they're just going to do 10% better than you would expect otherwise, without putting any artificial.
If you can find a way, create a bank of questions to ask during an interview to identify those guys, you are going to be rich.
Yeah.
to identify which guys.
Say those
The
self-starters,
yeah.
those people who take
The
pride
self-starters
in
are out there.
Yeah, that's
right?
what I mean. How do you identify them from, say, the non-self-starters?
The self-starters themselves aren't the challenge,
Yeah?
right? The self-starters themselves, they exist in any organization. But depending on what the culture of your organization, like if you got a poison culture, you're not going to keep them,
Right.
right? If you've got just a mediocre organization, eventually you're going to burn them out.
Right.
Right. It's only your top tier organization, like your Hiltons or
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
that Richard Branson never touched.
Yeah.
That's where your top tier people end up, right? Because you foster that in people.
But how do you identify those guys? How do you pick them out of the crowd? How do you identify who you're like? I know it's the Pareto principle, right? Like, 20% of your workforce is accomplishing 80% of your result. So how do you identify that? How do you separate that wheat from the chaff?
Well, you need to be a leader. You need to understand that shit. You need to start opening your eyes and actually getting to know your people and what they're doing out there. My biggest advice to engagement to any manager or owner, get out on the first thing you do every day.
Get on the floor.
Get on the floor, walk by and say good morning to everyone. Right? Doesn't matter if it takes you an hour. Get to know their names, say it to them in their own, say good morning in their own language, right? Smile, shake their hands, because that way you're showing you care for them. They feel that, right? And you get to read what's going on, what are the issues,
Yep.
right? And you get to see how their day's going, right? If Buddy's lethargic, if he's got red eyes because he's crying, right? Well, maybe someone's having a bad day. Maybe as the owner, as the manager, I can give a shit about that, right?
Have you ever? So I went to Greg Distributors to pick up something. Oh, no way, man. Other way.
What do you got against Greg's?
Yeah. What do you got
I
against
don't like it. And I'm like a lot of people. I prefer a lot of distributors more than Greg's.
Well, anyway, I was talking with
Low
with one of
performance.
the employees, and I said, "Well, what do you think of working?" He said, "I love it. I love working here."
Really?
Yeah, and he even gave us a tour of the place. I was there with I was there with Tracy, and he said, "Yeah, come here, take a look at this stuff." And he gave us a tour of the whole place. And the supervisor said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm giving these guys a tour." And he said, "Okay." The supervisor came with us. It was cool. But anyway, we're there, and he said, "You see that guy right in the middle? Like there's this big bullpen." Right, you have the offices around the end of the room, and there's this massive bullpen in the middle. He said, "You see that guy there, the heavier guy with the gray hair?" I said, "Yes." That's Mr. Greg. He owns the place.
Not the hockey player.
No. The guy who owns, the CEO.
Okay.
Right in the middle of, not in the corner office,
Yeah.
not in some other place downtown. He was right there in the middle of the bullpen with the, like,
Is this on 118th F?
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's the guy. So, yeah, that's the guy.
I got to get going.
We I don't know. We deal with Greg's all the time because my dad gets a good deal at Greg's because we used to be a vendor for them actually.
Okay.
He was doing remanufactured brake shoes for heavy duty trucks, and so
So
our discount is better than just about anybody else's discount.
Right.
So when people complain to me about Greg's prices, I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I don't.
Sorry, it's because of me.
But so I use them all the time. But yeah, the place, like there's zero turnover in staff at the Greg's
Interesting.
place I go to.
Okay.
Because we go to,
All right.
the people, like there's lots of like 15-year badges.
Yeah.
And because I'm going to the one out in Atchison most frequently, and the faces.
Never
Sometimes
change.
there's some new faces, but you don't really see the old faces. It's just like,
it's
they're adding staff, but they're not. The old guys are still there.
Yeah, the old guys are still there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Duly noted. I will
Greg seems
walk
to
back
be,
what I said.
Greg seems to be a fairly positive place to work.
Seems to be. Yeah.
I will keep that in mind. Anyways,
Right. On that fine note,
thank you very much, Sean. That was a good one. I think we should title this one, Steve Speaks More Than All Other Podcasts Combined.
I don't know.
Steve speaks out.
Steve picks the title. So
It was good. It was good to hear from you. man.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Strange,
Thanks everybody.
but weird.
Bye.